Hey friends, welcome back to the Free Assange. I am Misty Winston, joined by my co-host Eric, who you may know as Koi Contrarian on the tweeters. As you guys know, as always, we have an amazing guest. Alex Rubenstein is here, but we are going to, as always, do the numbers before we jump into that. There's a lot to talk about today. There's a lot of things going on in the world. So as of today, we have 4,053 days of illegal and arbitrary detention for journalist and publisher Julian Assange. There are 1,006 days since the WikiLeaks founder was kidnapped and trafficked from the Ecuadorian embassy after being sold to the UK in exchange for a $4.2 billion loan from the IMF. 370 days since Judge Vanessa Breitzer denied Assange bail just 2 days after motioning for his release in her ruling against extradition. 1,601 days of inhumane pretrial detention for alleged Vault 7 whistleblower Joshua Schultz. 1,006 days since the start of the political persecution of Ola Binney. 286 days since drone program whistleblower Daniel Hale pled guilty to one charge under the Espionage Act. 92 days since Hale was transferred to a communications management unit at United States Penitentiary Marion in Illinois. 214 days since hacktivist Commander X was arrested in Mexico and extradited to the United States. And in our good news, we have 42 days since Craig Murray was released from prison, 211 days since Reality Winner was released to home confinement. She has since been placed on parole under extremely restrictive, it's crap what she has to go through. 669 days of freedom for Chelsea Manning and 419 days of freedom for Jeremy Hammond. I would like to add some more good news to our list this year if we could do that. Because that's a lot of crap. That's a lot of numbers. And that's not even everybody. You guys know that. That's not even everybody. It's not even anywhere close to everybody. So like I said, we have a lot to talk about today. We have an amazing guest. He's an investigative journalist who writes for multiple different outlets. He also has a Substack. And he is the host of the show Pro Democracy Podcast, which you can find on Rockfin, which is amazing. He just had Kit Clarenberg and Caleb Maupin on, which was a great episode. You guys should check that out. So Alex Rubenstein, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Misty.
Yeah, of course. Holy crap, you guys. It's a big day. So it's the 20th anniversary of Guantanamo Bay. It's the 9th anniversary of Aaron Swartz's death, suicide, murder, basically. Let's see what else. It's National Human Trafficking Day. There's a lot going on today. So I don't even know where to start. Maybe we should start with Alex, why don't you just tell everybody, for anybody who's not familiar with you, which I'm fairly certain most of our audience will be, but for anybody who's not familiar with you, maybe just tell everybody a little bit about like how you got into journalism and also about your show, because I love Pro Democracy Podcast. It is so good. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I got started in journalism in 2014, basically after the NYPD killed Eric Garner with a chokehold for the crime of selling untaxed loose cigarettes in Staten Island. And actually, I was just kind of reflecting on that the other day because shortly after that killing, there was an outbreak of protests, and I got started by just going around with a camera and writing about those protests. That was my real gateway into journalism. I was actually like going to protests and seeing the fake news about it. I was like, these motherfuckers, man. They're lying about us. So that was what made me passionate about getting the truth out there, was seeing the actual misinformation, which is a word that I try to be very careful about using. But I was reflecting on it the other day because I realized that this unit that the NYPD is sending to restaurants to evict unvaccinated New Yorkers is the same unit that was started in the aftermath of those protests to police protests. So originally it was started off as like they'd follow protests around, and I've seen like lawyers that they don't like step onto the street by accident because you have to be on the sidewalk in New York. So they'd step on the street by accident and they'd like instantly get arrested, BS crimes like that. Really heavy-handed tactics from this unit. It's called the Strategic Response Group, and now they're sending them to they're sending them to restaurants to evict unvaccinated patrons. So basically, I was living in New York doing a lot of protest reporting. I used to do a lot of field reporting, and I got hired by RT, so I moved to Washington, and I continued to do a lot of protest reporting. Eventually, I started studying foreign policy and taking a real interest in that. And I and then sometime after I kind of segued into investigative reporting rather than going to every single alt-right versus Antifa thing, which I kind of developed. Yeah, performance art. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, I've evolved a lot in both my view of things and my approach to journalism. And now I tend to focus both on foreign policy and lately I've been focusing on the craziness around the coronavirus pandemic.
It's exhausting. It's so exhausting. And it feels like every day there's just more bullshit to deal with. And there's some other, ridiculous restriction that they're trying to push out or whatever. It is just honestly, and I just don't know how many times they're going to get to lie before people stop taking them seriously. You know what I mean? Like, how many times does Fauci get to lie straight to your face?
I would say infinitely, like reflecting on the Russiagate era. I would say infinitely, like, I was talking the other day with the episode that you mentioned of my show Pro Democracy Pod, about how Syria was like the most sophisticated psyop in human history, a media psyop, and that you can kind of trace the lineage from Syria to Russiagate and to now COVID, with this like very sophisticated propaganda. A lot of it's the same journalists, funded by the same foundations. So, I mean, that's what we're dealing with now. And I have to say, it's a little bit disappointing to see some people who didn't fall for the Syria psyop or the Russiagate psyop now kind of hook, line, and sinker with Fauci and the Democrats on the pandemic. But I'll be the first to admit that I wasn't like instantly as critical as I am now. It was a process, and I don't fault anyone who is like me and kind of took time to open their eyes a bit to what was going on. I mean, I was critical of Fauci from the beginning. But I think I took the virus a lot more seriously than I needed to. And I was probably a bit more forgiving towards China. Like, I saw a video recently where, and I don't want to knock China because it's not my job, right?
Right.
And they are a rising superpower, and I just don't think it's like important to really call them out. I think it's important to talk about what's going on in our country, but I don't think a zero COVID policy works in the United States. I don't think socialism with Chinese characteristics works in the United States.
No.
And you see these things where like they're going through the streets and just like fucking spraying everything, the pavement, the cars with chemicals. Like, I don't think that really does anything. Like,
no.
We
haven't seen the science behind that.
Right.
The science.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I've spent a lot of spilled a lot of ink pushing back on propaganda against China. But to see a lot of the anti-imperialist left just kind of like putting them up as the gold standard of COVID response, I don't think that's accurate. And
that is
China's
really
saying
weird.
that
I'm so glad you brought that up. I am so, because
me too.
seriously, I understand that there's a lot of propaganda in this country about China. So I understand like the reflexive need to defend China against that. And I think that, but you be reasonable about it. That doesn't mean that China is infallible. It doesn't mean that they're like the bastion of everything that we should be looking towards. And it seems like there are a lot of people who are just going too far the other direction.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate.
Well, and I see these tweets where it's like, 800,000 deaths from COVID in the U.S. in 2021, or some number, I forget the exact figure, but it's huge. And then China is 2, and I'm like, no, I don't believe either of these numbers. I'm sorry, like maybe they have a lot less than us, but I don't think it's 2.
No, and that's really the problem. It really speaks to the fact that we can't trust any government at all, period, because they're all going to lie. They all have, an investment in fabricating reality and making themselves look better, protecting themselves. So again, I just think it's this weird thing where there's a happy medium where you can understand that there's propaganda against China and that we should actively combat that, and that we should be honest and real about what's happening in China, and that we should prop them up when because they are doing great things. They genuinely are. Their high-speed rail is fantastic.
Yeah.
Like, they are doing great things.
Poverty alleviation. I mean,
yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of things the government of China does right.
Yes, but they're not perfect. It's okay to criticize
and
them.
I'll tell you guys, I've like, my Substack, maybe it's like a year old now. Most of my articles are about China, pushing back on anti-China propaganda. But I don't think that means that we should be totally uncritical, right?
No.
Just because they're like overtaking the U.S. economy, which I think a lot of leftists kind of like,
yeah. I get I get the need to. And by the way, I'm going to drop the chat to Alex's Substack. Drop it in the chat right now. I'll link to that.
Thank you.
Everybody should check it out. It's, again, fantastic. I'm a subscriber. But yeah, I think that. Well, no, but I'm a paid subscriber.
I didn't realize. Thank you. Yeah. No, I did a podcast because I need money. But with my investigative reporting on Substack, I just can't. I don't want to paywall it because I give the option of donating, but I don't want to paywall it because it's, I take this approach where I try to like put out like a lot of like information that other people haven't done, so that other people will kind of like carry the torch after my reporting, so it kind of defeats the purpose if it's paywalled.
Well, and I think as with most of my favorite journalists, because you guys know, I love journalists, real journalists, good journalists. And most of my cat is so fucking loud. I'm sorry. If you can hear her, I'm sorry. But I love journalists, and I think that most of my favorite journalists, it's more about getting the work out there and reaping some, massive wealth or whatever. Jules.
She's also a fan of journalists.
It almost sounded like she said, huh?
She is okay, she went upstairs. Good. She's very loud. But yeah, I think most good journalists, it's more important to get the work out there than it is to like be rich and famous. And those are the journalists that I have the most respect for. And it is important that, in my opinion, this is why I preach supporting independent media so much. I think it's super important that we support those people like yourself, like Gray Zone, like, Slow News Day and Whitney Webb and all of these people who are out there doing incredible research and writing and work. And we need that so desperately right now. We need people who are telling the truth, who are countering the approved narrative, who are looking deeper than, like superficial levels of, nonsense. And there's just not enough of it. Well, I mean, maybe there is, though.
I'll tell you, I have pitched 2 outlets in my entire career: Mint Press News and the Gray Zone. Those are the only outlets I've ever pitched because I never wanted to be like an Intercept employee or writing at The Nation or anything like that. And I think that it's difficult, right? I have a job that's not even journalism, just to like survive,
Right.
But I couldn't agree more about supporting actually independent media. And it's really surprised me because I never really followed podcasts. I skipped the whole podcast boom, and I got a new subscriber. Thank you.
Rob's amazing. We love Rob.
So I skipped the whole podcast boom, but it's really blown me away to see what a wealth of information some people are putting out through this medium. I'm a writer. I don't speak publicly so well. So and I don't listen to podcasts.
And it took me forever to get Alex to agree to come on my show. I don't like appearing on camera. I'm like, dude, it's just gonna be us like shooting the shit. It'll be fine. You'll be fine. It took forever. Forever.
My apologies.
No, it's okay. I shouldn't like yell at you because when Action for Assange first started to try to get me to come on just as a guest, it took months. I tried everything because I agreed to do it drunk at a Jimmy Dore show.
Yeah.
And so after that,
that's where all the best decisions are made.
But I woke up the next day and was like, oh, I just agreed to do that. And I tried really hard. But if anybody knows Andrew Smith, he is incredibly persistent. And he just bugged me until I was like, fine, dude, I'll come on. Oh, yeah.
I mean,
so I shouldn't
Jimmy
yell at
was
you.
another surprise for me because I didn't really listen to him. And, you know, I at first I was like, who, like, I see clips about him on Twitter and I'm like, who is this guy? Like, you know, I'm sure he's kind of an idiot. And then I actually watched his show for a while and I was like, hey, I mean, how am I going to knock this? You know?
I mean, he is kind of an idiot. He will admit to that. He will.
Yeah, he says
Listen,
it straight up that he's an idiot in his garage.
he's a
comedian.
jagoff comedian
Yeah.
high in his garage.
Pothead.
I mean, he
Yeah.
knows it, but the fact that he knows that and is still able to produce more like better news than actual news people says
Yeah.
a lot. It really says a lot. And I think he gets a lot of shit. He gets a lot of shit even in my circles of like people who do great. But I love Jimmy Dore. I think he does great work. I don't think he goes far enough sometimes. I think he's doing a great job and he's evolving. He's growing. He's moving forward. Like, I think he's doing fantastic work. And anybody who has the balls to speak out against establishment narratives is a friend of mine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was during the Russiagate era and he started calling it out. I mean, some people got really famous talking about Russiagate. I was not one of them. I was working at RT through Russiagate, and I mean, I did a lot of work
bot?
that.
You're a Russian bot, Alex.
Well, I was accused of being a Putin stooge. And
me too.
Now I'm accused.
Yeah, you guys have something in common.
Now
I'm not a stooge. I'm his buddy.
Yeah. Right. So I mean,
Potato,
it started.
potato.
I was accused of being a Putin stooge, and now I'm like a Jimmy Dore acolyte, and I don't even like. I mean, I respect him. I occasionally, like, maybe every couple months, I'll watch a video or something, but I don't really watch his show. So it's really funny when people accuse me of following Jimmy Dore just because I don't agree with them. You know, I don't agree with MSNBC, so I must be rapidly consuming. Yeah. Jimmy Dore content.
Yeah, no, I get that a lot too. And I don't watch Jimmy as much as I used to. I was actually a fan of his from like way back in the day when he did comedy and everything else. Like a long time ago, he had a show. And then the only reason I ever subscribed to the Young Turks was for aggressive progressives. I always liked him. Just he makes me laugh. He's funny. Whatever. But he really evolved as far he went from being like a comedian who was sometimes right about the news to a comedian who is also a journalist. Like, I consider him to be a journalist at this point. I don't know that he considers himself to be that. But I love Jimmy Dore. He's always been incredibly nice to me. I'm not kidding. Incredibly nice to me. He came on the Vigil. He's offered to do Facts on the Ground. We actually did a Facts on the Ground with him, but I fucked it up and it didn't record properly. So he offered to come back. He had me backstage at one of his shows. Like, him and Steph have been just super. They're the nicest people at every show that they do up until recently because of COVID. They would, do meet and greets, stand for the entire theater to come and do pictures and all of that stuff. They are really genuinely just super down to earth, nice people. He gets a lot of shit. And I just think it's because people are angry that he does what they want to do or what they wish they could do.
Well, I just remember calling out the Young Turks in like 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And now Jimmy Dore has like thoroughly exposed them. But I was getting really into Jimmy Dore, and then I Googled, is Jimmy Dore Jewish? And I found out he wasn't, so I stopped. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, yeah.
He's just a pseudo journalist, so he only fits part of the.
Yeah.
Well, he's got like kind of the Jewish like
and a comedian. So he's a comedian and
right. Yeah, you would expect that he's Jewish. I feel kind of shortchanged here.
Yeah. That's funny. Oh,
okay. It is kind of interesting to watch some of those older clips though, when he's on TYT and he's talking with like Dave Rubin and Gina Grad and like people that like have gone in so many other different directions. And like, these were people who were all at one point in time, buddies, and God only knows if Dave Rubin and Gina Grad and Jimmy Dore even think about talking to each other these days.
I think Jimmy would. I think Jimmy would talk to just about anybody. I think he kind of has the same mentality that I do. But what I love about Jimmy is that although he has evolved on, the things that he reports on, the things that he sees, he has remained consistent. And I appreciate consistency a lot. I really do.
I'm any criticism you heard me say of Jimmy was in jest. I have a ton of respect for him. And actually, he's been on Pro Democracy Pod. That episode is not paywalled. And it's him and Max Blumenthal talking about the journalistic response to ivermectin, early treatment, and a lot of the just COVID actual misinformation.
I fucking love when Max Blumenthal goes on Jimmy Dore. I love it so much. I love it so much because Max is funny. And, because he does really serious journalism, you don't always get to see that side of him. And when he's on Jimmy, he can kind of let loose a little bit and he's fucking hilarious. And I love it so much.
You can see some of his humor come out too when he does some of those recordings where he's like interacting at an event or a protest or what have you. He'll get after. Yeah, he's super snarky.
I see it in when he edits my articles. It's just like it's funnier and it's like more punchy and like full credit to Max. I mean, I like to think of myself as a good writer, but Max can really fucking write and he can really edit, and that's a talent in itself to turn something that's like really interesting and well written into just like an explosive piece, that you read it and then you for the next like 5 hours you're thinking about it,
Yes.
And that's
brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and him and Anya are also two people I would love to give shout outs to because they are incredibly nice as well. They've come to Assange events that we've held in DC. They have been huge supporters of ours. Every time we go down there, they're always super like friendly. And the first time I met them, I was so nerdy because I get really awkward, especially when I'm meeting somebody for the first time, and especially if it's somebody that I have a lot of respect for. So we're outside the British Embassy in DC, and I see Max and Anya like standing over in the crowd, and I'm like, holy shit, Max Blumenthal and Anya Parampil showed up to our protest. Oh my God. And I'm like freaking out. Me and Steve are like, oh my God. And I'm like, I'm gonna go say hi. So I like run over and I'm like, hi Max, thanks so much for coming. And I just stood there like an idiot. And he's like, yeah, okay. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what else to say. So I just walked away. And I was like, oh, so embarrassing. I'm so embarrassing, you guys.
Is that why you were so like normal when you met me? Is because you didn't have the same respect?
Was I normal? I'm
just giving you shit. I'm just giving you shit.
It's rare. If you guys meet me in person, I'm super awkward. I'm not lying about that. It's a legitimate thing. I'm very awkward. I love meeting people, but prepared for awkward. That's coming.
I remember the first time I talked to Max because Anya and I used to be colleagues at RT, and I'd watch Max when he like come on the various programs, and I was just like so blown away by this guy. I'm like, who is he? And so I went up and talked to him about Syria. And I was like so out of my league, it was ridiculous. And I'm not going to give specifics because my views have changed. But let's say I had some flawed views on the conflict. That Max,
you weren't pro white helmets, were you?
I was not pro white helmets. I was like pro YPG, right?
Oh, okay.
And so I tried to talk to Max about that, and I was so out of my element. And this is why I really respect Max so much, is because I was dead wrong. But he talked to me respectfully, and he heard me out. And since then, he's, we've collaborated. We've written a lot of articles together. He's published me a number of times. So, he really, he gave me the benefit of the doubt, despite being like dead wrong on the major issue of the time. So, he's a really, like, you wouldn't think that he's such a gentle person, but he really is.
He really is.
And he's just very, very good guy. So, I get mad when I see people talk trash about him, because I'm like, this,
I do too.
He, and not for nothing. I mean, it was working with him on the Piero Midyar series that we did back in 2018 that, like, it really opened my eyes on how to like do investigative reporting. So I can't credit him enough, for my growth as a journalist.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, he's been instrumental in just my growth as a person, like my political views and the way I see things. I mean, listen, again, we're not like lionizing Max Blumenthal. He's not infallible. There's things I disagree with him on, all of that stuff. But I think he's a genuinely good person, a brilliant journalist for sure. And he does really great work. So again,
and he's a little bit easier to emulate than Julian Assange, right? Because
I mean, yeah,
not all of us can just get document dumps all the time and
Yeah.
have a perfect track record.
if we're being real, Julian Assange is kind of a once in a lifetime figure. I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
it's not somebody we're going to see, especially given the fact that they've used him as kind of this. I always liken it to the proverbial head on a stake. He's been the warning. So I think it's going to, as was intended, it's going to be a chilling effect on all of anybody else who's even considering being a Julian Assange. And that's going to be damaging for decades. I think we've already established a lot of damage in that aspect for sure.
Yeah.
Erica called AG Garland today. Thank you. Yes, I called I think around 10 or 11 times ish. There was a push today to do like a phone call to the DOJ, let them leave messages. I call the DOJ generally once a day. I don't know. I'm not perfect. Sometimes I miss a day, but I try to call at least once a day. Today I called 11 times a day, maybe 10. I don't remember. I lost count. But yes, I definitely called, and I was not nice. And we're going to go, just so everybody knows, we're going in April. On April 11th, that's the 3-year anniversary of Julian Assange's kidnapping. I'm not going to say arrest, his kidnapping. So we're going to go to the Department of Justice, stand outside with a megaphone and tell them to fuck off. And it's really, really, really therapeutic. And I highly recommend it. Everybody should come join us. So yeah, I don't know.
I did want to bring up something that you brought up at the top, Alex, which was when you were going through your introduction, just the word misinformation, right? It's such a tricky thing now. And so my past is I was a journalist, but I was a journalist for the military industrial complex. And so I'm not proud of that part of it, but I do know kind of how this game works. And when these words get co-opted and you still want to use them in the right context, is this something that like you will still use, but maybe just have some sort of synonym of sorts so that you're still kind of explaining something is not being told correctly?
Yeah, well, I mean, having to write, because this is like I talk a lot about like information operations, right?
Yeah.
So this is something that I have to talk about a lot. So I just say actual misinformation or actual disinformation, and just be very clear and like where it's coming from, who's producing it, who's paying for it. And just kind of turn that word around on the people that are supposedly fighting it. Because I mean, since 2016, since the election, it's become $1 billion industry to fight misinformation. What was this? I'm sure you guys saw this Twitter moment, which had articles from Reuters and AP fact checking mass formation psychosis, and it's like. I mean, that was like mind blowing to me because it's like they're really going to use these fact checkers for fucking anything.
Yes.
Like, do you think that like when Sigmund Freud was like, creating the theory of psychoanalysis or whatever he did, the newspapers are like, well, this isn't in the American Journal of Psychiatric whatever.
Right.
So of course there's new concepts that are introduced, and for all the look. We're told to trust the science like every day. And now they're saying, well, like they're like fact checking psychology, right? And sociology, which are not sciences. So it's like
they're soft sciences, I would say.
Yeah. Soft sciences. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's generous.
It is. But I mean, it is what it is. But I think I'm super glad that you bring this up because this happens all the time with language. And I've talked to Danny Scherzen a gazillion times on Facts on the Ground because I love him. And he always talks about language, and because language is super important and it's used against us as a weapon all the time. They co-opt words, they change the meanings. Y'all, they changed the definition of vaccination. They changed the definition of anti-vax. Just change. Yeah. A vaccine. They changed the definitions of words,
like literally on the website.
Yes, in real time. They just change to fit their narrative, and that should terrify everybody. That's really scary. And that's that's not even counting all of the words that they just co-opt and bastardize, like misinformation or like progressive or socialism and communism. I mean, Joe Biden's a communist. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous.
That's kind of par for the course, right? Because Obama was a socialist, Bill Clinton was a socialist, Jimmy Carter, basically any Democrat is a socialist. So I mean that's kind of to be expected, but what's been amazing, I think that this is like the most in your face misinformation in recent memory is when Joe Biden was like saying that, oh, we're going to give everyone like $2,000. And then he was like, actually, it's $1,200 and it's on top of the $600 that we already gave you when Trump was president.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's like just actual misinformation. And I think that's, I mean, he's lucky that was like right at the beginning of his term, because that would bite him in the ass so hard for the midterms. Because people were really pissed about that. Everyone was told you're getting $2,000. And that, I mean, so if you actually add up the amounts that were given out by the federal government, more money was given out under Trump than Biden.
Yep.
Yes.
And he took credit for that last 600. So, I mean, that's the kind of misinformation that I think we need to talk about. And I think it has a big impact on the electorate.
Yes. I mean, they straight up told the voters of Georgia, if you elect Democrats in this special election, $2,000 checks are going to go out the door immediately. That was the whole thing.
That should,
right?
and like, even that should be illegal, right? Like, vote for us and we'll give you money.
Yeah, that's bribery. And I mean, I don't know how that's not bribery, but the voters of Georgia, if I lived in Georgia, I mean, I don't vote anyways, because I mean, if I vote third party, and it's only just, I don't think it's ever going to change anything, but it doesn't take me long to vote in Ohio. It's super easy. So I go vote and I'll vote third party. But if I were in Georgia, I would never vote for a Democrat again. Ever. Never. Ever. I mean, they bold-faced lied straight to your faces in a desperate time. I mean, people were desperate, and they were all these promises, and then they immediately shit in your face. It's crazy. Oh, it's painful. It really is painful. I don't understand how anybody could still have any faith in electoral politics as any kind of change maker after the past, 5 years for sure, but really the past 5 decades. Your vote doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter who's president. You guys, I mean, today's the 20th anniversary of the opening of Guantanamo Bay, right? 4 presidents now, 4 presidents, and they've all made their promises. Well, to be fair, Trump didn't promise. He said there was going to be no more releases. We're not letting anybody out
back
of
in
Guantanamo.
business.
Yeah, right.
So to be fair, at least he didn't promise it and then not do it. But Barack Obama ran on that shit, fam. Yeah. He ran on that. And then
twice.
Had 8 years and didn't do a damn thing. Not a damn thing.
Oh. Actually, it's worth pointing out Bill Barr, Trump's attorney general, one of them. He actually used, I think it was the 80s, he used Guantanamo Bay before it was for the terrorists. It was for a mass interning Haitians with HIV or AIDS. So that's like, I think that's just worth pointing out as far as like the timeline of how we got to where we are today. Was that before there was the terror fear, it was HIV, and now it's like, I'm surprised they're not putting COVID patients there, right?
Oh, don't give them any ideas. Don't give them any ideas.
They're gonna send the unvaxxed there.
That will be next. Yeah, no, that will be next. That's people. When I say stuff like that, people immediately are like, "Oh my God, you're such a conspiracy theorist." Look around you, guys. Look around you. What's happening? I mean, you have people like Noam Chomsky saying, "Oh, well, fucking let them starve," and just the rhetoric surrounding the unvaccinated and people who are vaccine hesitant and people. These are people who have genuine concerns. I don't know why anybody has trouble seeing that. Again, it's like you said earlier, that there are these people who saw through Russiagate, no problem, saw through Syria, no problem, saw through all of this bullshit. And then suddenly COVID comes along and their brain broke. And they're willing to buy hook, line, and sinker everything that the CDC sells them, everything that, Joe Biden's selling them right now. It's insanity. And the fact that everything is so arbitrary, like right now they're saying that medical staff who test positive for COVID can go back to work immediately. It's fine. No big deal. But you have to show your papers to get a bagel.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah,
don't
and
know
I mean, like my aunt died last year around this time in February, uh, after getting admitted to the hospital and contracting COVID in the hospital. And of
Oh.
course, her death is listed as a COVID death, but I think in all likelihood she was going to pass anyways. But you know,
So
it
much of
really,
that.
Yes.
it really infuriates me because she was like a COVID Nazi, right? And she wouldn't mind me describing her as that. She called herself that. She didn't leave her home for a year. She was a person who like lived her life to host her friends. I mean, her husband, my uncle, he built their house, and he made this giant dining hall with the purpose of having these grand gatherings of their friends. She didn't see a single friend for a year. She never left her house. So she lost the last year of her life, in part because of the propaganda around the virus, and then going to the hospital, catching COVID in the hospital, and then dying. Her death is being used to perpetuate that propaganda as another, number in that statistic. So, it personally, it really upsets me. And I remember, during the Russiagate era, I felt the same way because, I grew up in a liberal family, working class, but liberal. So, people that believed in gay rights and abortion and all that stuff, and you try to talk to them about Russia and their brains would shut off. Anyone over the age of 50, their brains would shut off. And it was like, personally, it hurt me because, I was like working at RT, right? So I'm like, look, I'm the guy that they say is doing this. Do you really think that like, like when I was there, I was doing social media for them, and they asked me if I had any idea for hashtags for their election coverage. And of course it was that campaign. I didn't get the winning idea, but it was that campaign that got them banned from using, promoting ads on social media. So I saw firsthand how bullshit it was. And there were a lot of people there that were anti-Trump, right? Like a lot of people there did not like Trump, the majority of them. But it was that they also didn't really like Hillary Clinton. So, that was where we really got into trouble. But I mean, so much of what they were saying about RT at the time was just ridiculous to me. The intelligence community was putting out these press releases about content that hadn't been on the air in 2 years.
Abby Martin's show
right.
that was 2 years hadn't been on there for 2 years, but suddenly she's responsible for the election of Donald Trump.
And this is why I got off Facebook, because I was just sick and tired of going on Facebook and seeing my family post like stories from Kurt Eichenwall that Yahoo News about how Russia was stealing the election. I'm like, through RT, and I'm like, it's just bullshit. I'm sorry, and I don't want to argue with my family about politics, So I got off Facebook and I'm only on Twitter now, and I think my life has improved since.
Yeah, I
did the same thing.
I did the same thing.
I did the exact same thing.
Around Cambridge Analytica, I got off Facebook.
Oh, really?
I still have my account, mostly because I really want to download my pictures that are on there, and I just have been too lazy to do it.
It's super easy.
I know. There's some way you can do it like all in one fell swoop.
Yes.
I never think about it. But also because I do have family on there. So like every 4 months I'll pop on there and be like, hi, proof of life status update.
Right.
And that's it. And then I'm off and I don't get back on it again. I don't have the app on my phone. I don't have any of that stuff. So
I recently, like last week, I logged into Facebook because I'm getting married in a few months. So I have
congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have like a lot of contacts that I haven't spoken to in a while, who I wanted to invite. And so I got on there and I scrolled down my timeline a little bit. I'm like, who are these fucking people? Like, I don't know any of you.
Yeah. No. And there's sometimes that like, I'll scroll because I try not to scroll. I just try to like get on there, be like, hey, I'm still alive, and then get off. But every once in a while I'll scroll and I'm just horrified at the way some of my friends are thinking and the things that they're thinking. And I realize that it's a good thing I'm not on there because I would not have these friends anymore. We would not be in it would not be good. It would not be good. So yeah, Facebook is evil.
Do you guys see any like attempts at, so I've like I deleted my account. Do you guys see any attempts at like any type of unity where we can use social media, especially in the respects of Facebook, where it is more of our friends and family, as opposed to Twitter being, you know, people across the globe, really, where we can kind of reconcile things? Or do you think it's so broken that deleting it and getting rid of it altogether is going to, like, because for me personally, it's done so much for my psyche, where I don't know what my friends are thinking half the time until I talk to them, and then they say something to me and I can just kind of blow it up and I talk about the past, because that's way better for me when I'm hanging out with them, you know?
Yeah.
Do you guys see any kind of like where we can reconcile and actually use those platforms for what they should be used for?
I mean, if you want to try it,
I think it's hard.
To you. I'm gonna not do that, but
it's hard because social media it's difficult to have a legitimate conversation where people, because it's hard to get intention across through text. It's hard to get, you know what I mean? So I think that's a difficult medium to have these kinds of conversations, really.
Well, I don't.
That's the biggest thing for me too. Is just the text messaging. You lose all the nuance. You lose all the facial expressions. You lose all the inflections in your voice. You lose all of that, and it's all for interpretation. Yes. And I could be saying exactly how I'm saying things right now, and people could take it how I'm saying it if I were. And
people get very defensive
as yelling.
Because you're attacking their belief system, essentially.
Exactly.
And that's a very difficult thing for people to take in. And so even if it's meant in the best possible way, I think people will it's like second nature to just become defensive immediately. And that doesn't go well.
Yeah. Well, when I was on Facebook, I'd share my articles, and then I'd have like my friends arguing with me about the article that I wrote. And I'm like, you know what? Go write your own fucking article. I'm not arguing with you, you know? But look, I don't think really the problem is Facebook. I mean, as that might be a little controversial to say, but like it's mass culture, and what people write on Facebook is just kind of an expression of mass culture. So I like Twitter because it's chronological rather than like, it doesn't display results based on like the most engagement. That's the benefit of Twitter, I think. But if there's a lot of talk about like, breaking up Facebook or reining it in and stuff like that. And I just think that like people are just going on Facebook to repeat what they either read in the news or saw on the news. So, if you want to get to the source of the misinformation, then you have to like go after like media, not social media.
Yes. Well, I think that you're right. I do think that Facebook has played a role in perpetuating that sort of media, the approved narrative, that they put everybody into their own echo chambers and all of that stuff. So I think it's helped. And I think you're absolutely right that the real threat here is the mainstream media. And to me, the mainstream media is one of, if not the biggest threat that we face as a country, because it is
enemy of the people, right?
Yes. It's so bad. It's so bad. I mean, if you want to come at me and say, oh, she's Trump. No, he was right. I don't like Donald Trump. He was absolutely fucking right about that. 100%. 100%. Mainstream media, how many times, y'all, they've lied you into how many wars? I mean, how many times they get to lie to you about? They lied to you about Russiagate. They lie every single day. Oh, and they never lose their platform. They're never going to lose their platform. I mean, I have friends who've been reporting on COVID stuff from the beginning, the way that it really legitimately was. And now some of the stuff that like Ryan Christian lost his, channel for Last American Vagabond, or Steve Poikonin's been, demonetized on YouTube for like 2 years because he was telling the truth about COVID. And now some of the stuff that they got punished for is like not like everybody's talking about it, like it's just it's no big deal. But mainstream media will never be penalized ever.
You know what we should do is we should get endorsed and get advertisement money from Pfizer, and then maybe we won't get the platform.
Pfizer's never going.
Well, I just say that's how CNN stays in business, right?
Followed by question mark profit. Right. But no, it's funny. I was reading an article today. Did you guys see Nancy Pelosi recently? Have you seen
about what?
Her like just
have I seen her?
The eyebrows?
Yeah.
The eyebrows. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess I don't know if it was like the Daily Beast or whatever. I was reading some mainstream article about Tucker Carlson because he was like joking around that Michael Jackson was on Good Morning America when it was Nancy Pelosi. So they're like, a new low for Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
And then in the article, like halfway down, they're like, lawyers for Tucker Carlson have argued that his show is not factual and that he's expressing his opinion. I'm like, okay, but like the lawyers for Rachel Maddow said the same thing. So, it's like the media is so hyper partisan.
Literally.
Right.
Yeah.
So the media, I mean, this is the problem, is that like the media is like so hyper partisan. I don't think that like it's just the issue of it being corporate media. It's so hyper partisan that like everything is like there's no values on either side, on Democrats or Republicans. It's about tribal alliances, right?
Well, it's hyper partisan intentionally because it's used as a divisionary tactic. It's used to keep people on their teams. And so, Fox News uses all this inflammatory rhetoric about Democrats, and then MSNBC uses all this inflammatory rhetoric about Republicans. And so it keeps everybody on their own teams. It keeps everybody angry at the wrong people. And that's exactly what it's designed to do. It's not designed to inform y'all at all.
I think we even saw that, as far back as, post 9/11, when we saw Patriot Act being implemented, and everyone on the right was, basically cheerleading for it, saying like, yeah, let's get all these terrorists if they're in-house, because, the story was told that the terrorists were taking, plane lessons in Florida or wherever the case was, right? And now who are the domestic terrorists? It's the right-wing extremists, right? So they don't have the foresight to see 20 years down the road, this could come and bite us in the ass. It might, the terrorists, that word may change over the course of time, and they may be labeling us. So then all of a sudden that Patriot Act that they were rah-rahing 20 years ago is coming back to get them.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not to keep talking about Tucker, but like he was a part of that, war on terror drum beating. But I think he's kind of learned his lessons. And in fact, he was calling out Ted Cruz just the other day for inflating the definition of terrorists, and saying that, like, Ted Cruz was saying, well, I call January 6ers terrorists because I've been using that term for years for, like, Black Lives Matter protesters, and Tucker's like, okay, but they're not terrorists. Like, if you kill a cop, that's not an act of terrorism. I don't agree. He said, I don't agree with it, but it's not terrorism. So, there's a lot of people that knock Tucker based on his past. And, I think there's a lot of opinions that he has today that I disagree with. But it seems like he's learned from, like, at least some of his mistakes. Whereas like the mainstream of the GOP, like Ted Cruz, he went from war on terror hawk to white supremacist hawk. And, that's just kind of not advantageous for the Republican Party. So, I mean, at least credit to, like, Tucker for thinking for himself.
Well, and Tucker, I mean, I think Tucker's kind of a piece of shit. I think he's just playing his role. I mean, he used to be friends with Rachel Maddow, and he was on MSNBC, and now he's a Fox News reporter. So he says disgusting things about immigrants and stuff like that because that's his audience, right? So I think he's playing his role. But he does on occasion get things right, and he does on occasion have more courage than a lot of other people. And he will have people like Glenn Greenwald or Anya Parampil or Aaron Mate or Jimmy Dore. He platforms more leftists than MSNBC, and it's not even close. It's not even close.
Not for nothing, he's also the only entertaining news person to watch. Like,
even
if I disagree with him, I'm like, at least, like, it's entertaining.
Yeah. And he talks about Julian Assange. I mean, the week before Donald Trump left office, he ran like a whole ass campaign, 5 days, that whole 5-day week that he was on air. He had on a different person every single day lobbying Donald Trump for a pardon for Julian Assange. I didn't see Rachel Maddow doing that shit.
No, I didn't see the left doing that.
No.
I mean, it was the right.
Don't even get me started on the left and Julian Assange. I will lose my fucking mind. It drives me crazy. It is so disappointing. It makes me so depressed that this is where the left is at. It's like, free speech and press freedom and all of that stuff used to be a solidly leftist issue, solidly leftist. And it's completely flip-flop now. And now I have way better luck with the right than I do with the left and getting support for Julian Assange. And that makes me really fucking sad. It really
Yeah,
does.
yeah. And, you know, I mean, there might be some people on the right that are like genuine in that, but I think a lot of that too is just like, oh, well, he hurt Hillary.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying about like the tribal
There is a lot
mentality,
of that.
you know?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's not about principles. It's not like the right woke up one day and was like, you know what, we are going to believe in press freedom and taking on the deep state. It was only because the deep state attacked Donald Trump. It was only because Julian Assange hurt Hillary Clinton's campaign that there's been this kind of realignment. But it's not about morals or virtue
Or
you know.
consistency. There's no consistency. That's what drives me nuts. It really does. Be consistent in your principles. If you believe in something, believe in it all the time, even if it means that, you know, I will stand up for the right of anybody to have free speech. And that includes people like Alex Jones or, you know, anybody, people I despise, people who I think have disgusting beliefs and who I don't agree with on any level. I will still fight for those people to have free speech because I believe in it as a principle. It's not, to me, it's not, but that in our society currently, just the environment, it is very tribalist. And again, that is by design. And I think that mainstream media has a huge role to play in that because they do, you know, a very good job of keeping everybody in their own camps, making sure, and really it's just, they want you to be mad at the wrong people. They want you to be mad at each other instead of recognizing that we have more in common than we have differences and that we all share a common enemy.
Well, just like when I was saying the conservatives didn't recognize that the Patriot Act could bite them in the ass someday, the left also doesn't recognize that, hey, just because they, you know, shut down Alex Jones and then a number of other controversial people, they don't think that could come back to bite them in the ass 20 years down the road either. You know what I mean? It's like this foresight is just always just like in the now and not like seeing like, oh, this happened, you know, to these people 20 years ago, and this could just as well happen to us. We're just people living in this country over, you know, being overrun by global elitists, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing with January 6th too. The left's response to that, you know.
Oh.
It's like,
learn to recognize a psyop, bitches. Dear God. It's so you know, all of this is just very frustrating because the whole reaction to January 6th is solidly because they don't like the right. It has nothing to do with reality. It has nothing to do with anything that actually happened on the day. They don't like Donald Trump. They don't like the people who were there. And so it must be bad. And it sucks because these are people who, but again, we're seeing like leftists like cheer on the FBI. And it's
unbelievable.
Really weird. You guys, we live in this. I hate this timeline. I fucking hate it. It's the worst ever. You know, the left is like propping up the CDC and the FBI and the CIA and cheering on, you know, facial recognition being used to go after protesters. And it's sad.
yeah.
Oh, it's painful to watch. It really is. How do we combat that? How do we combat that?
Good question. I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't either.
Keep putting out good information. But you know, I hate to keep talking about Syria, but I really think it kind of goes back there because maybe I was too young during the NATO-backed intervention in Libya, but Syria, there was a lot of people on the left that were falling for this very sophisticated propaganda to take positions which were very much an anathema to what the left traditionally believed in non-intervention and you know, not bombing other countries or like sending money to religious extremists or weapons to religious extremists. And a lot of people on the left, in fact, the majority of the left, in my view, at the time, I think people have kind of smartened up to Syria. But at the time, you know, most people on the left were very supportive of U.S. action in Syria, and it was the same thing. It was humanitarian intervention, and I feel like that's what we're seeing with COVID now, is that there's these humanitarian arguments about deaths of innocents that kind of overtake brains and destroy any critical thinking. And the second that you challenge it, you're a fascist, you're a eugenicist, you're, you know, you support an evil virus versus an evil dictator. So that's like the and this is what I focus on a lot, is just trying to push back on this humanitarian idea, right? Not because I don't value human life, but because I do. And I realize that this talking point is being weaponized against us. So, I mean, that's like my show, right? On Rockfin, pro-democracy pod. I push back on the idea of like these pro-democracy protesters, but it's the same because, you know, these head choppers in Syria were called democracy protesters. And the humanitarian thing to do was to send them, you know, weapons and anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think to answer your question about what we do is we really have to push back on this idea of what the mainstream calls humanitarianism. Yes.
And the greater good. That's the big thing I'm hearing right now, is that it's for the greater good. But which, listen, I'm not opposed to, you know, doing what's best for society as a whole. I'm not. But the problem is that what's being forced upon us is not what's best for society. They're using fear. Fear is a very powerful motivator, and they know that. That's all of their propaganda is kind of based in that. And they use fear to manipulate your way of thinking. Once you're scared, your brain kind of stops working properly. And so, you know, and if you notice, anytime a politician is giving a speech or whatever, they will often lead with something fear-mongery, because then anything else they say after that, your brain's going to receive it much differently. Because, you know, it's just a human thing. It's a human reaction. Your fight or flight kicks in, you know, you get kind of that rush of adrenaline. And so it's always used against us. And so what troubles me about what we're seeing right now is that the discourse has been completely shut down. You're not allowed to have conversations. You're not allowed to question authority. You're not allowed to. And it's not like anybody who is questioning these things is asking outlandish, ridiculous questions. Like, people will try to paint those, like myself, who haven't been vaccinated, who don't choose, or who don't plan on getting vaccinated, you know, for at least a while. I'm not in any rush whatsoever. But, you know, you're instantly labeled. I'm not anti-vax. I'm labeled as anti-vax. My kids are vaccinated. I have all my other vaccines. I'm not anti-vax. I'm labeled a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I have genuine concerns about very powerful people who are known liars, who are known to be corrupt, who are known to be full of shit, and who, I mean, it's not like they have this stellar history of being, you know, on the up and up. I have legitimate concerns. And then the fact that for the past 2 years, they've been caught lying repeatedly only bolsters my suspicions. And so, you know, we should, and what I've been saying this whole time is that this is something that impacts literally every human being on planet Earth. All conversations should be allowed. We should be able to have all conversations. Everybody should be able to have their concerns heard and addressed. And, you know, there wouldn't be so much suspicion and all of that stuff if they had been honest, if there was transparency, if we had access to information, if we were allowed to have discourse about this thing, it would be a lot different. And so, you know, stop blaming people who are asking real and legitimate questions about it, and start blaming the people who have created this environment of distrust. Which, you know, makes people, it makes it impossible for people to, you know, believe in what they're selling us. Because generally speaking, it's bullshit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So when you're talking about, I'm sorry, Alex, just real quick, when we're talking about co-opted words and anti-vax being one of those co-opted words, like, I don't think there's a single one of us who haven't gotten the shot who are telling people you can't get the shot and you should be fired for getting the shot. No. Right. And that's turned around on us saying like that we're anti-vax. We're choosing not to.
I'm a personal choice person. I am all for personal choice.
And it's okay to mock the deaths of people who didn't get vaccinated.
No, that's disgusting.
But don't you dare mock the deaths or mock the infection of people who were vaccinated.
No.
You know? But I saw an article yesterday on CNBC that Pfizer and Moderna are looking to create an mRNA vaccine for the flu. And it's just crazy to me because, I mean, we haven't had, in my view, we haven't had sufficient time to really judge mRNA vaccines on their merits, right? There's a huge amount of skepticism about that. I mean, I think if they roll that out, it'll mean less people getting the flu shot, right? And I mean, it's like the vaccine we have at this point, I don't think you guys, hopefully I'm not going to get you demonetized for saying
fine.
this, but I think
we're not monetized anyway. It's fine.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
At this point, it's fair to say that it's not very effective. So why are we going to try the same technology to do a vaccine for the flu when we already have a relatively effective flu vaccine? I mean, I don't know the exact statistics of how effective the flu vaccine is.
It depends. The flu vaccine is varied because there are different strains of the flu. So each year they try to formulate the flu vaccine kind of based on educated guesses about what strain is going to be most prevalent for that year. And so they do their best to kind of meet that demand. And sometimes they do better than others. Sometimes it's, 75% effective. Sometimes they, hit it out of the ballpark and it's like 90% effective. But I think that they've really damaged their credibility on that as well.
Yeah. I mean, but from the perspective of Pfizer and Moderna, I can't imagine they're looking at the situation of the past year or so, or however long we've had the vaccines, if we can call them that.
Injections. I like to call them injections.
Right. They're not looking at that and saying, oh, well, doing this an mRNA for the I can't speak today. For the flu is gonna help stop the flu.
Yeah.
They're looking at their profits over that period of time and saying we need a new vaccine with this new technology. So
has it ever not been about profits with the pharmaceutical industry? That's my question.
That's why I don't know why it's wrong for me to be skeptical, because the opioid epidemic, I'm supposed to trust those people? Come on.
Right.
Oh, come on.
And all of these companies have poisoned people. I mean, just straight 100%. Up. Pfizer, Moderna, straight up. J&J, they've all
of them
poisoned people.
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm not saying that the vax is going to kill you or even necessarily make you sick, though it does make a lot of people sick. But, they're not like they rolled it out as fast as they could to make as much money as possible, not to save as many lives as possible.
And they sold it as something it's not.
And now the left is saying that it saves lives. And it's like, look, you guys know better.
Right.
You know better than to think that the incentive is to save lives. The incentive is profit. They should. Go back to leftism 101.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so we have our next guest here. Scott Horton is here. Do you want to stick around, Alex? We're going to talk about Guantanamo Bay. Do you want to hang out, or do you need to go?
I'm going to get going.
Okay.
Thank you for asking. Sorry, I didn't have anything super coherent.
No, this was fantastic. I told you, this is a very free-flowing show. I mean, people have in the past said that we're scripted, which makes me giggle every time. We're not. This is just, a very free-flowing show. So, you guys can check out Alex.
Script.
Yeah, they're just post-it notes. So you guys can check out Alex. He has a Substack. I'm gonna throw that in the chat
How long did it take for the Kremlin to mail you that?
My post-its?
Yeah.
I have a really quick line through to Putin, so we get them pretty quickly. We get them overnighted. So
DHL, that's the way to go.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks
for meeting you, Alex.
On.
I appreciate
it.
it.
We appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so that was our guest, Alex Rubenstein. And now we are going to welcome to the show our next guest, who is an incredible author. He's one of my favorite voices about foreign policy. And he has a book out that everybody should check out. It's called Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, which I highly recommend everybody reading. I think I have read it twice now. And I constantly reference it. So everybody check that out. Scott Horton, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah,
I'm sorry that Alex
Thank
went. I wanted to thank him for heckling W. Bush at his recent speech there a few months back. It's really important, frankly. It seems like kind of a trivial thing, but W. Bush decided to rear his ugly head and go and give some speeches in polite society among the liberals in Southern California. And in both cases, a leftist showed up and started screaming at him about what a war criminal he was and refused to allow him to get away with attempting to kind of return to polite society and be normalized back into American society.
Oh, Scott, but he's a painter now. He's so cute and nice.
You know what?
And
I mean, that works for the Ellen DeGeneres audience.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but I mean, just then again, I think Alex proved, helped to prove there that nope, you can't quite pull it off. Michelle Obama can hug him and they can do whatever they want to try to rehabilitate him, but he can't be rehabilitated. And it was Alex mentioned his friends And then the other guy that heckled him was a veteran himself.
Yes.
And talked about, the hardship that he'd been through. So it was no trivial thing whatsoever. The way that they did that and the effect that had, it was just like throwing the shoe at him, which I interviewed that guy, by the way. It's just like
who haven't you interviewed?
Yeah. I interviewed Julian Assange.
Oh, okay.
But just like, that was his victory lap. That was December 2008. And it was supposed to be, see, I did good. And I created a parliamentary democracy, and the Iraqis are so thankful. And the guy stands up and says, this is for the war widows and the children and the dead people, and throws the shoe at his head and deprives him of that little PR victory, which is, again, a really big deal. So in case anybody, watching this knows Alex, tell him I said that, because I really do appreciate that a lot. I thought that was really important that they did that.
Yes. Well, as I just mentioned, you have interviewed a gazillion people. I love your show, the Scott Horton Show. Everybody should check that out as well. And the reason why we brought you on tonight is because today is obviously the 20th anniversary of Guantanamo Bay, the opening of Guantanamo Bay. And you have interviewed some of my favorite people who have been covering that from jump, like Andy Worthington and Clive Stafford Smith. And you're very well versed. Obviously, you've been speaking against the war on terror for some time now. So maybe we should start just very basic, most of our audience, I think, knows what Guantanamo Bay is. But just in case, maybe you could just give us, what is Guantanamo Bay? Where is it? Why is it there? What is it doing? Why are we still talking about it 20 years later?
Sure. Well, it's an American naval base that was seized 120 years ago in the Spanish-American War. And the Americans have held it ever since then. And of course, the country was run after the war with Spain all the way through 1959 by American sock puppet dictators like the Batistas. But then after the revolution in 1959, when Castro came to power and the communists came to power, the Americans kept the base and said, well, what are you going to do? Kick us out? They had no military ability to expel the Americans, of course. And they said, well, we have a lease, which is, of course, signed in the first place at gunpoint. And the communist government there in Cuba has refused to accept payment for the base and has insisted it's a violation of their sovereignty this entire time. In the pre-terror war era, it wasn't in the news much, other than when they would capture Haitian boat people, essentially. And they would, under Bill Clinton, they interned them there at Guantanamo for a while before sending them home, that kind of thing. But then when the terror war started, I almost don't know where to begin with this.
I know.
Okay, the whether the guys that were fighting or not, whether they are signatories to the Geneva Convention, and whether they wear official American military uniforms, the Americans are bound by our signature to the Geneva Conventions, and our armed forces are supposed to be bound by the laws of war. And they already include how to deal with so-called enemy combatants, illegal enemy combatants, because what they did was they said Taliban foot soldiers, because they don't have Western European style perfect matching uniforms, they are essentially, and because they hadn't signed the Geneva Conventions, that this was a loophole that meant that they didn't have to follow the rule of law anymore. Now, forget Bush and Cheney, but you had just had generic, politicians in charge, and you'd put the army on the ground in Afghanistan and said, okay, you guys figure out what to do. The military already knew what to do. They already had for 200 years. They've been developing a tribunal system to figure out how, for battlefield processing purposes, to figure out who's who and what they need to do with them for their own actual purposes, right? But see, in this case, their actual purposes were served by one, letting bin Laden and his closest friends escape, while two, taking the fight to the Taliban quite literally instead of taking the fight to Al-Qaeda. And in no uncertain terms, I mean, they just said this over and over again. I always cite Bush at war, but, Richard Myers, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said, catching bin Laden is not the target here. I just read another thing the other day. So, well, we really wanted to focus on the Taliban in Kabul, and so Al-Qaeda had to wait, and this kind of thing. They're not shy about that. They wanted to expand the war, and they needed bin Laden out there. But so then the American people needed, had essentially a giant kind of PR want, which was show us some blood or some effective explosions. They showed us some explosions of some apparently barren, empty mountainsides and this kind of thing. They could show us missiles going into a cave, but to what effect? And they didn't have anybody to round up. You know, the few hundred friends of bin Laden were either bombed and killed at Tora Bora by air power, or they escaped. And so the Bush administration needed essentially a public relations stunt. So what they did was they just put out bounties, and they just started rounding up nobodies, 700 and something nobodies. Almost all of them, you know, entirely innocent. Dilawar, the cab driver, and, you know, what's his name, the goat farmer. And, you know, they had the Pakistani military would come in where they're just collecting bounties, 5,000 a head, I think it was, to just say that guy, and that guy are Taliban, are bad guys. And of course, they're telling the American people that the Taliban is Al-Qaeda. It was them there, Afghans over there somewhere, what did it. And you're to conflate all these things together. And you're not supposed to understand that and differentiate between a few rich and influential Egyptians and Saudis hiding out in Afghanistan and poor Afghan peasants who never did anything and probably never even heard of Egypt, much less the United States of America. And so that was what they did. And they filled Guantanamo Bay with a bunch of nobodies. And I have interviewed people all up and down the chain in the process here in the military over the years of how they did this and how, you know, the guys who originally would receive the guy, well, first of all, the guy who's paying the bounty and nabbing the guy, his squad, they're just some infantry guys. They grab a guy, they wrap him up and ship him off to the next stage. Right now, it's somebody else's problem. Now the guys at the base who receive the captive, they go, whoa, a captive, and presume his guilt and presume that this is a bad guy, or else why would they be giving him to me? And then they turn him over to the guys on the C-130, and the guys on the C-130 go, whoa, I've been told about these guys. They're the worst of the worst terrorists in the whole world.
Yeah.
As,
Dick Cheney.
It was Richard Myers or Donald Rumsfeld. I think it was Rumsfeld.
Yeah, I think it was Rumsfeld. Yeah.
Yeah, these men would chew through the chains that hold them to the floor of the C-130 if they could, to destroy everything we love and care about and this kind of. So then the guys at Guantanamo are receiving planes full of people. And they're being told that we are filling this prison now with the worst of the worst terrorists that we've captured in Afghanistan. So then the people at Guantanamo, all up and down the chain, it's somebody else's responsibility who these guys are, what they may or may not have done. Nobody is in charge of that. Only everybody presumes their ultimate guilt all the way through. And so, and then once they got to Guantanamo, you had essentially at the same time a parallel program going, of course, where any actual Al-Qaeda high-value targets that they were looking for, any friends of bin Laden that were actually rounding up, like John Kiriakou and his men nabbed Abu Zubaydah in Pakistan, and they also nabbed Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi bin al-Shibh in Pakistan. Well, those guys, they didn't go to Guantanamo with the goat herders. Those guys were turned over to CIA, and the CIA took them to black site, secret, lawless torture prisons in Thailand, in Romania, Poland, Morocco, ships at sea. And at one point, they were at least being held at Diego Garcia. I don't know if they were being tortured there. And where am I leaving out? There are more of those black sites. I mentioned Morocco, right?
Yeah, they're all over.
And then so those guys, the actual guilty, if you were talking about anybody who had anything to do with bin Laden or especially the September 11th plot on the United States, those people weren't brought to Guantanamo Bay until 2006. Okay, so at that point, much later in the process, after 700 and something men have been held there for years, then they bring Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other actual guilty Al-Qaeda guys there. And then that's a whole new public relations win for them, essentially, is that now they get to pretend that, yeah, see, we're holding the worst of the worst. Maybe we weren't, but now we are. And we just kind of pretend that, yes, this is what we've always been doing, is holding the worst of the worst here.
And it's not like the American people are going to remember what was said 5 years previous anyway.
No.
Yeah, they change the story anytime, that they feel like it. And TV can't keep up anyway. Even the best reporters, a lot of times, move on from that beat and don't know. But so now, obviously, as people should well be aware, the CIA, when they grabbed these guys and took them to their black sites, it was to torture the hell out of them. Now, what happened immediately was that Donald Rumsfeld and his group, especially the neoconservatives, Paul Wolfowitz and his lawyer, Jim Haynes, they got jealous of the CIA and said, why is it? It's not fair that the CIA gets to torture people and we don't get to torture people. And so, you know what? The Geneva Conventions don't apply to Al-Qaeda. Well, they don't apply to the Taliban. And if they don't apply to the Taliban, then that means we can do whatever we want with them. And so they were torturing people at Guantanamo, people who, you know, you hear rumors about this guy Katani, who allegedly was really an Al-Qaeda guy. They called him the 20th hijacker for a while, which I don't think is really right. But they tortured the living hell out of this guy. But then they tortured, you know, what's his name? The Pashtun goat herder in the cell next to him, who had nothing to do with any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Who was essentially from the same country as the Taliban that grudgingly hosted bin Laden's men there, right? In other words, you know,
no choice in the matter.
Yeah, with nothing, you know, means nothing. And they did this for years and years. And then people should know too, it's really important. I'm 99% certain of this now. I'd have to go back and extra check, but I'm 99% certain that more than 700 of these men were set free before the end of W. Bush, right? So you can't say, oh, Obama and the Democrats came and just let them all out or something like that. It was W. Bush himself. I
actually just listened to your interview with Andy Worthington. I don't remember which one because I know you've talked to him. I think it was 500 under W. Bush, and then Obama came along and did 200 some.
Okay, yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah,
that sounds right. So yeah, it was the vast majority of them, which is just an absolute confession. What is that other than a confession by W. Bush that he's a war criminal, that these people were innocent, that he just rounded them up and tortured them, held them without trial, without charge for years in so-called detention in prison.
And some of these were children, we should point out. Some of them, like as young as 14 years old.
That's right. And in fact, you know, I interviewed Omar Khadr's lawyers who told me, you know, his entire story and not just his lawyers, but different human rights groups or whatever who had studied that, where his father had brought him to Afghanistan and then ditched him with some guys who were then attacked by the Army Delta Force. And somebody threw a grenade and killed one of the special operators. And out of the entire battle, Omar Khadr, the 14-year-old, was the only one who survived. So they just decided to blame him for the murder, which wasn't really a murder at all. It was self-defense. It would have been if it had happened at all. Self-defense in a firefight in a war zone. That's not a murder charge. That's not a war crime. And they even made up this whole story about this young man, like straight out of some ridiculous TV show, pulling the pin out of the grenade with his teeth and chucking it back over his head over the wall and all of this stuff. And, you know, they just made this up. They made it up and they tortured the crap out of this kid and they held him for years and years. They didn't let him go until 2016 or 18 or something. I interviewed another guy who had been, or his lawyer, his Air Force officer, I think a colonel or a lieutenant colonel, that was his JAG lawyer representing him and saying, hey, look, you know, I'm on USA's side, but this is my duty here is to be the defense attorney for this guy. And I got to tell you, they accused him of having banned chemical weapons. He had Tupperware with salt and sugar, and I forgot what was the third thing.
Get the hell out of here.
Pepper, it was something else. Salt, sugar, and one other thing. And then they admitted it. They like still kept the evidence and had it, and finally went back and tested it and said, "Oh, geez, yeah, sorry, you got us." This is a guy who'd been there for 14 years.
Jesus, for having salt and sugar.
Yeah. And then so now once Rumsfeld got jealous of the CIA's torture program and instituted his own program at Guantanamo, it almost immediately then filtered back to the war zones in Afghanistan and Iraq, very quickly in Iraq, where the rule is the Geneva Conventions don't apply. They would to Saddam Hussein's army, but once they dissolve and put on a T-shirt and start fighting as an insurgent force, now they're illegal enemy combatants, meaning they're terrorists and we can do whatever we want with them. And you know, there's various sources for this. You kind of got to, you know, I think I do probably the best job of writing this up is in Fool's Errand in the Afghanistan book, where I cite the different, with all the footnotes of the different Red Cross studies and the different human rights organizations and everything, that in the documentaries that were created that show that they tortured tens of thousands of Iraqis.
Mm-hmm.
They tortured just thousands and thousands and thousands for years. So Abu Ghraib, of course, got the big headlines and that was how the whole torture scandal broke, was because of the National Guardsmen on the night watch at Abu Ghraib prison took all these pictures. And in the new digital age, that got out real quick. And there was an internal army investigation, and Seymour Hersh found out about it. And, the rest is history there. But what had happened, the background to that, which Hersh had written too, I'm sorry, I used to know the name of all these articles right at the top of my head. The book is called Chain of Command. The gray something. It ain't the gray zone. It's the gray. Maybe it is the gray zone. I don't think so. The gray something about Abu Ghraib by Seymour Hersh. But anyway, he put together essentially,
it is the gray zone
behind it. Yeah. And then, so there were all these whistleblowers in the Iraq War too. So Brandon Neely was a whistleblower from Abu Ghraib, but then there was this guy, and he just recently died, they say, of medical neglect by the VA. His name was Corporal Ian Fishback. Almost certain he was a corporal. His name was Ian Fishback, and he was an Army. I forgot. I'm sorry, his exact position, but he worked at Camp Nama, which stood for Nasty Ass Military Area, and it was under the command of General Stanley McChrystal, who was the head of the Joint Special Operations Command in Iraq at that time, top tier special operations forces. And Fishback talked about how they would just absolutely torture the crap out of these guys for fun. They would wrap them up in tape and take them out back and beat them like a heavy bag, practice their Muay Thai kicks and whatever on them, or they burn them with their cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
One of their captives was called a puck, a person under control. And so they go, okay, I'm going to go kick a puck. Okay, I'm going to go smoke a puck. And smoke a puck meant tie a guy up and burn him with your cigarettes for fun and this kind of thing. And this was all going on Stanley McChrystal's watch there. Then there's a guy named Tony Lugaranis, who I believe was National Guard, who talked about how, oh man, we tortured them in their houses. We tortured them on the side of the road. We locked, I'm pretty sure it was Lugaranis said, we locked these guys in chicken cages and then electrified them and shocked them. Just like the worst horror stories out of Vietnam, electroshock torture and stuff, or your local sheriff's department, for that matter.
Yeah,
same thing. Potato.
Yeah.
And then, so it was, it was an epidemic. It was widespread, and it was, if you line up all the Afghans who went in and out of Bagram prison, and all the Iraqis who went out of the prisons under Iraqi control, under Shiite Iraqi control and or American control during Iraq War II, you're talking about tens of thousands of people who were tortured during all this. Now back to Guantanamo, which is the question. There are 3 decisions. Okay, I remember. Hamdan was the first one, and then Rasul, and then Boumediene. And these were the 3 Supreme Court cases where the Supreme Court told W. Bush that his, fancy little trick of putting this prison in the foreign communist unfriendly nation of Cuba as a, end run around their jurisdiction and rule of law was not going to work. And they said that in the various cases, they said that the writ of habeas corpus still applies here. I guess that was Boumediene was the final one. So I forget now the particulars of how the first 2 restricted his power, but they essentially, began to state that the power of the presidency and the commander-in-chief clause is not absolute, but it is subject to judicial review and constitutional review. And then by Boumediene, they ruled that these men all deserved a writ of habeas corpus in federal court. And that means essentially, and this is a really complicated one to break it down. Everybody read Anthony Gregory's book, but essentially habeas corpus is the power of the judge. It's not the right of a person. It's the power of a judge to demand from the executive branch why you're holding this person or not. And it gives the judges the power to overturn those decisions and set people free. But then, I'm sorry, I should have studied up for this interview. I'm pretty sure Congress under Obama, because Obama wanted to close it and send the people home. And at least at first, he said he did.
Right.
And
he ran on it.
Yeah. In fact, he never really followed through, even from the very beginning. And I'd have to go back. It's really, difficult to find. But there's an old Glenn Greenwald article from when he wrote at Salon.com where he cites, he has the block quote there of a Washington Post story where they're talking to the Democrats in the Senate. And they say, man, we were all geared up to abolish Guantanamo Bay. But here we are sticking our necks all the way out. And then where's the president? And Obama never came and whipped this thing whatsoever. He never sent his people to make this a priority at all. So those few of us who were like, all right, let's go with this momentum and close Guantanamo, were basically left out on a limb and had to come, climbing back in kind of slowly and embarrassingly because they never got his support to do it.
That feels like just about anything
right.
that has any kind of momentum like that, right? Is that anything that's run on some sort of platform, anything that has some sort of like doing what's right, essentially, just gets lost because the person who's supposed to be essentially responsible for taking it and making it effective just disappears, and then it's just gone forever because we can just move on to the next news story, no problem.
Yeah,
I know. This the exact same thing happened with Donald Trump, where he came in, he said, I want out of Korea and I want out of Afghanistan. And they said, yeah, but what about this and 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 this? And he didn't have the focus to say, wait a minute, we started this conversation with, I want out of Afghanistan, So, yeah, I mean, and he would have really had to have been committed and determined and single-minded to make his intentions actually implemented. Especially when it comes to foreign policy. I mean, the president is the president. And if he says, Admiral, you heard me, I said sail home or swim home.
Yeah.
Your sorry fired ass. They will follow orders. They will do what they are commanded to do. As we just saw with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. They didn't shoot Biden in Dallas. They said, okay, fine. And they got out because he insisted. But that was what it took. It took his will to say, no, sorry, General, I heard your argument 3 times now, and the answer's still no. And now you're going to follow my orders. And then eventually they buckle and give in. Donald Trump didn't have the wherewithal to do that. And Barack Obama, frankly, didn't have the wherewithal to do that. He did on withdrawing down from the surge, but, certainly didn't have the ability to resist them when it came to escalating Afghanistan. And as we're just talking about, he gave up Guantanamo before it was ever a fight. Yeah. He could have come in there and said, you heard me, damn it. We're closing Guantanamo. I just won an election on that. Yeah. And we're doing it. And he didn't do it.
There was no fight. No fight.
I mean, and Eric Holder, his attorney general, who's a horrible person, but was doing the right thing in this circumstance, he went ahead. And I don't think he discussed it with Obama. He went ahead and I think even went so far as to indict, or he went to move to transfer custody of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi bin al-Shibh, at least, I think maybe a couple others, to New York State. And we're going to put their ass on trial in Manhattan and lock them away life in prison. You watch. And then Obama backed down and said, hey, Eric Holder, we're not doing this. And it's because it was led by the Republicans in Congress who passed a resolution essentially banning funding for the closing of the prison and the moving of the prisoners, which is actually, to me, still a cop-out because as president, Obama could have said, fine, I'll find the money somewhere in your Pentagon slush fund and I'm going to do it anyway. and the troops are going to move when I tell them to move. And it's as simple as that. He didn't really have to back down before Congress on that one. He could have fought them and won on that, but he did not choose to do so. And so here, literally still under W. Bush, Powell, possibly Rumsfeld, certainly Bush, Powell, Robert Gates, the second Secretary of Defense, who Obama then kept. And I think even Condoleezza Rice, they all said they wanted to close Guantanamo, that it served its purpose. Not that we did anything wrong or anything, but it's time to go ahead and get rid of this thing. Well, that was 2 presidents ago, 3.
Yeah.
And Obama kept the thing open. And by the way, one of the things that Obama did, as you guys know, he ramped up the drone war essentially in place of the CIA's capture and torture and interrogate and hold these guys program. Because the CIA didn't really want to be involved in that anymore anyway. That's not exactly their thing. and they had taken so much heat for it and all. And so they said, well, we'll just kill everybody. And then we don't have to deal with torturing them and figuring out who's going to hold them or who's going to prosecute them. And one of the things that they did, because you couldn't always just drop a Hellfire missile on somebody. So there were times that there were people who were captured, who were turned over to their custody, et cetera. And what they do? They'd take them to the Bagram Air Base prison in Afghanistan, including men who'd never been to Afghanistan before in their lives, had no tie to Afghanistan whatsoever. And why? For the exact reason that W. Bush did it at Guantanamo Bay, as a loophole end run around the Constitution and the Geneva Conventions and the rulings of the Supreme Court. That, okay, Supreme Court, you said that Cuba counts. Well, but Afghanistan is an active war zone, so I know you don't think that Bagram counts. So they're kidnapping people from all over the world and sending them to the Bagram Air Base to be tortured. And they were being tortured under Barack Obama and by Americans, and then later by the Afghans when they turned the prison over to the Afghans, but still under American authority and with his cooperation. So he did ban the CIA from torturing people, but he did not ban the authorities in Afghanistan, the military authorities, from all of their, brutal tactics that they would try to define down as something a little bit less than torture or something like that. In fact, if you remember when Obama was sworn in on his next day in office on January the 21st, he said, I have signed an order. I forget the exact language, but essentially I have signed an order ending the torture program. Now, this is something that we shouldn't do anymore, and et cetera, like that. But he did not say that I have signed an order instructing the government, including the CIA and whoever, that the law always was and remains that torture is a crime in the United States of America, and you are forbidden from doing it. That was what the law already says, right?
And no one was held accountable. I think that's a huge thing. Nobody was held accountable. And still,
that's right. But even then, he didn't even really give up the power to declare the right to torture people. He just said, I have decided that right now we are not going to, right? Which is a lot different than if you were the president and said, the law since George Washington is that if you torture somebody, we're going to put you in prison.
Yeah.
That's the law. That's always been the law since the 1770s. And there's nothing to argue about. In fact, in the Reagan years, Ed Meese prosecuted a Texas sheriff for waterboarding a guy. That was in 1983. You waterboard a guy, the federal government, a sheriff, Texas sheriff, the federal government will lock you in federal prison for that. That's against the law.
How can they hold up those laws now, considering what has happened for the past 20 years? Can there be an argument in a court case that, hey, you guys have been waterboarding or torturing for the past 20 years. What's the difference if I do it, kind of thing?
I don't know. You know what? I don't think the Justice Department is bringing charges like that against anyone right now. So I don't know that it's being tested. I think that probably wouldn't work as a defense. The idea was that they had a memo from the Office of Legal Counsel that said that their federal employees working for a specific agency that's being authorized by the president to do this, but that in other circumstances, they're not allowed to. But, and I'm sorry, I just saw Alex's correction there. It was Jeb Sprague. I thought it was Jeb Sprague,
and also Mike Preisner was the other one.
Oh, Mike Preisner was the other. I'm so sorry, man.
No, that's okay.
I'm praising the wrong guy. Mike, that praise was meant for you, man.
Mike Preisner. Shout out to Mike Preisner.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Me and my footnotes. I used to remember stuff well. Now not as well.
You're still a library of information to me.
You are a library of information.
So.
Yeah. I kind of like it. You were on my other show, Facts on the Ground. I don't know if you remember. It's been some time.
Yeah.
But we literally were just like, okay, tell us about Afghanistan. And then we just sat there like listening. I didn't even have to talk the whole time. I was just like,
here's
listening.
the Guantanamo story. You can read the other Scott Horton, who I'm kind of mad at because he's so bad on Russia and Russiagate and stuff.
Yeah.
But I really like him anyway because he is so good in the W. Bush years. And he, of course, is the law professor at Columbia and editor at Harper's Magazine and international human rights lawyer and really great guy. and he wrote this series for Harper's Magazine. I think the original investigation was by some students at Seton Hall or something. And the story is of 3 guys that were murdered by the CIA at a secret black site at Guantanamo Bay, not under military control, but over the hill. They called it Penny Lane or Camp No. And there was, I guess, another one was called Strawberry Fields, and they're adjacent to Guantanamo. So there's this heroic Army sergeant who's standing guard duty that night, and he witnesses all these shenanigans going on as these bodies are being transferred around. And suffice it to say, he can tell that these guys were killed and that there's a cover-up going on here. 3 guys were apparently choked to death with rags down their throat. And then there was this huge cover-up. And the other Scott Horton wrote all about this for Harper's Magazine, the so-called Guantanamo suicides, with suicides in ironical quotes there for you. And these guys were just outright murdered by the CIA and totally busted, and no accountability, nothing happened. And Jeffrey Kay, another great journalist who's done a lot of great work on Guantanamo Bay, has a whole other story. I'm sorry, I forget the guy's name, but a whole other story about a guy that was also murdered at Guantanamo Bay, or at least died under very suspicious circumstances. I think it was even proven that he was killed.
And this was made to look like a suicide attempt too, right?
Yeah, they claimed that they had all killed themselves, but there was, I think essentially it was just dropped because they couldn't prove that. They couldn't demonstrate that in any way. But the problem was no one was trying to hold them accountable anyway. No. So a thin excuse was good enough, kind of a thing, is my recollection of the deal. And then that same guy, Hickman, who was the heroic witness in that case, is the guy that wrote the book, The Burn Pits, about all the guys getting cancer from being stationed near the burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. And that includes an entire chapter on Beau Biden, which you can see the PBS NewsHour interview with Biden, with the president, where he explains that someone gave him that book and told him, hey, man, this book has an entire chapter about your son and his brain cancer that he got from the war. So he tells that story. Then he read that book. And I think, I've always thought Joe Biden is scum. He's been bad on everything his entire political career, and even on a personal level. Like, for example, his wife in 1972, right after he was elected, ran a stop sign, and she and the daughter were killed, and the 2 boys in the back seat survived. But he spent his entire political career blaming that wreck on the guy that drove the truck and calling him a drunk driver.
Ruined his life.
This scumbag drank his lunch that day and killed my wife. That was not true. And that was a real human person who, this is the worst thing that ever happened to him in his life, was through no fault of his own, but it was his truck hit their car kind of thing, right? So he killed them in a very literal sense, but it wasn't his fault at all. They jumped right out in front of him. And then Biden, who's the senator, spends the rest of the guy's life accusing him of criminally negligent murder of his family, essentially, right? Which is just not true at all. It just makes for a funner talking point at your little political thing. And that's what kind of person Joe Biden is. He's a bad person.
Yes.
But that being said, he's a little bit deeper of a thinker than W. Bush. I guess maybe if Jenna Bush had been a nurse in the war and had gotten murdered or something, that he might have started to think twice about the thing then. But I think Joe, knows that. And by the way, I've heard combat veterans resent the idea that Beau Biden was killed in the war. He wasn't killed in the war, but he was killed of the war.
From the war, yeah.
Yeah, he was, in a sense, a casualty of it. Although I understand that's not the same thing as taking a hit in a firefight and all that. And there are guys who, them and their buddies, gave their all in a much more direct manner, in a way that I can understand the objection there. But the point
I do have a friend who suffered pancreatic cancer and passed away due to the burn pits in Iraq as well.
Yeah. I mean,
Eric is former military.
He'd be alive right now. You know what I mean? So he didn't
Yeah.
get shot there, blown up there, but it's not that much different, you know? But I think Biden is the kind of guy where, you know, if he doesn't care about anybody else, at least he cares about himself and he cares about his own good son. And this is the non-crackhead son.
Yeah, the one son.
Son who was an
one
officer and state attorney general and had a decent life, you know, was the good son.
Yeah.
And And Biden knows, and maybe people in your audience don't know this, but Biden knows this, that he delivered the U.S. Senate to George W. Bush in 2002. The opposition party controlled the upper house in 2002, and they could have stopped that war.
Yep.
And instead, Joe Biden was the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, and he was Bush and Cheney's whip in the Senate. And he was the one who made it his business to ensure that John Kerry and Daschle and Gephardt and Hillary Clinton and all of the worst of the, most high-profile Democrats supported the war and delivered the Senate vote to W.
And
Bush
bragged about it until recently.
That's right. And now lies about it and pretends that he opposed the war all along and this kind of thing. But I think, you know what, there's even a clip, you guys might have seen this during the campaign. There's a clip where a couple of war veterans come up to him and say, hey, listen, we lost our friends in the war and the war was your fault. So screw you. How dare you run for president at all? And he says, well, my son died of the war too.
Oh yeah. I've seen
and
that.
They said, yeah, but we didn't say anything about your son. And he goes, yeah, well, you better not. Which, what else is he going to say? I don't know.
He's like a 14-year-old boy.
Well, yeah, it's like bar fight words. Yeah.
Is that like, you know what? He actually did lose his son because of that war. And so he did pay his price for that. And if you listen to him talk about Afghanistan, for example, he says, I wasn't going to tell one more family that they had to lose their boy to fight for women's rights in Afghanistan, to fight to keep the Taliban out of power in Afghanistan. That's not the same as protecting the American people from international terrorism. That's a local problem. And we feel sorry for those people. But would I give my last surviving son to go and fight for women's rights in Afghanistan? No, I wouldn't do it. And I wouldn't ask that of you either. And the thing is, I never heard Barack Obama say that. I never heard Barack Obama say, my precious girls, would I sign them up for the infantry to go and fight for this thing? Hell no. And so how the hell am I going to do that to you and your family either? He didn't even think that way, much less talk that way. So I think that's, not to give Biden too much credit, but just, at long last, he's made every error there is to make under the sun. And so what else is there left? You know what I mean? He's even kind of been climbing down on Russia lately. I think his cabinet are all worse than him on Russia. And he's like, I don't know. What are we going to do? Fight Russia? So there's like a little bit of a wisdom that's finally been earned by this guy. Shades of when W. Bush turned down strikes on the Russians over the Georgia War in 2008, where Dick Cheney was like, let's hit him. And W. Bush said to the cabinet, all right, who here agrees with Vice that we ought to attack the Russians? And they all were like, and then that was it. He didn't do it. Yeah. Even W. Bush at some point kind of snaps out of it and realizes there's a limit, So
that's surprising. I've never heard that before, and I'm surprised that those people actually do have limits, and they kind of get checked. I haven't heard that one, and I hadn't heard the Biden one either.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the Biden one, it's NewsHour with PBS is where he talks about Hickman's Burn book. Oh, that's Burn Pitt's book. That's how I got on this. Was the same hero, Joseph Hickman, who wrote the book about it. But then, the W. Bush thing, Ron Siskind reported that. And I forgot, there was a second source that reported that same story. I used to know both sources off the top of my head, but there were two different sources that said that when Georgia invaded South Ossetia in early August 2008, and they attacked Russian peacekeepers there, then the Russians sent their infantry through the tunnels under the mountains to go and kick the Georgians back out of South Ossetia. And Cheney said, we ought to hit the tunnels with missiles and collapse the tunnels on the Russian tanks and trucks coming through the tunnels. And at the principals meeting of the National Security Cabinet, W. Bush said, who here agrees with the vice president? And Stephen Hadley, I guess, was the national security advisor at that time. And he and the rest of the cabinet were like, no, sir. And Bush said, all right, well, we heard you out, Dick. That'll be enough from you today. Thanks, kind of thing. And went on. So, And that was when he only had a few months left as president. He wasn't going to go out getting us into a damn war with the Russians. Yeah. Not even W. Bush is that crazy and horrible.
I think it's just really what is politically untenable. If it's not going to benefit them politically, if it's not politically advantageous or for their career, I think that's kind of their limit. That's really their limit.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That is it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I don't know.
And Cheney's just seeing dollar signs. So.
And anybody could be afraid of an H-bomb, though. You know what I mean?
That's fair.
Yeah.
Like that.
That's fair.
They say, I guess this is, again, with the multiple sources, who really knows, but they say that when they put out the movie The Day After in 1983, which depicted a full-scale H-bomb exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union, that Ronald Reagan watched that and it totally kicked his ass. And that he, it helped him to actually visualize this is what it would look like if somebody nuked St. Louis. And he just couldn't stand it. And, and it was right around the time that Gorbachev was trying to end the Cold War anyway. And Reagan decided that, he had started out very hawkish. But I think they say that he had decided at that point that he was serious about all the buildup being a means to the end. We're going to build up missiles in Europe so that we can trade them away. We're going to build up our forces enough that then we can end this Cold War on a credible basis. And which he did, which, he and Gorbachev worked together to do. And by the time of the end of H.W. Bush, they had brought down the nuclear arsenals on both sides from 40-something thousand on our side, and I think 60-something thousand nukes on the Soviet side, down to lower than 10,000 each. Or at least had signed agreements to bring them lower than 10,000 each by that time.
Interesting.
And it was because of that move. It was somebody showed Reagan some special effects. This is what it would look like if H-bombs went off in America. And he was like, oh, man. In fact, as long as I'm on this, there's a story about Dick Cheney. When he first became the Secretary of Defense under H.W. Bush in 1989, that they brought him in to the Pentagon and they showed him a simulation of this is what it would look like if we had a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. And that at some point it went on so long that Cheney, I used to have the quote. I must have the quote somewhere. I had saved it somewhere. I could find it again, I guess. But where he talked about like it made him sick. He couldn't believe it. They showed, essentially they would nuke Moscow like 300 times. Because every agency has to get a crack at that radar station. But what if it's a dud? And so we want two. But if the Navy gets to hit it twice, then the Air Force gets to hit it twice. But Missile Command is angry that the bombers get to hit it twice. The Missile Command also wants to hit it twice. So that's 4 from the Air Force and 2 from the Navy. And then it's just like this. And then, what if it's a dud, man? We better make sure. And so you would end up nuking the smoldering crater of what had been the city of Moscow over and over and over and over again, like you're digging a hole to China, where there's just nothing left to kill, where even Dick Cheney, old iron ass, as H.W. Bush called him, the worst war criminal of our era, he looked at the map, the virtual, the simulation of this, and said, guys, enough. What the hell are we doing? And I think he demanded like an entire review of the war plan. That how can this be that this is the way we would fight a nuclear war? Is just make sure to set off every last one we have or something. Yeah. What is this? It's like the worst kind of bureaucratic, economic, incentives and structural, misshapenness, only with H-bombs, right? Where you would think that somebody responsible somewhere would make sure that the war plans make sense, but they just don't. And this is Daniel Ellsberg's book. The Doomsday Machine is like this too, that he came in, he had already been in the military and had already been an analyst and all this. But when Kennedy was elected, he came to work in the White House. And one of the first things that his job was to do was to get his hands on the Pentagon's nuclear war plans for Russia and China. And at first they wouldn't give it to him. And he's going, listen, the president of the United States sent me here to bring these to him. And so you don't have higher classified clearance than the damn president. Give me the files. And they said, actually, we do have a higher clearance than the president. He's not allowed to see them. And they had to fight about it for Kennedy and his men to even be able to get the war plans. And as soon as they opened the war plans were, if we have any conflict with Russia anywhere in the world, obviously the flashpoint would be, the most likely one would be a fight over West Berlin, which was wholly surrounded by East Germany, right? The western half of the city, the free half of that city in East Germany. And if there was a fight over Berlin and we end up, some tanks start shooting at each other over Checkpoint Charlie, then America will nuke every single city in the Soviet Union, not just Russia, but in the Soviet Union and China.
These are grown-ups.
These are grown-ups. And they'll kill every last living and breathing Soviet and Chinaman. That was the war plan, the one and only war plan that America had when Kennedy came to power at the end of the Eisenhower years. And then Daniel Ellsberg went and did a tour all around and found how the entire nuclear command structure was just crazy. He said there were, like Dr. Strangelove, where this one crazy captain launches the war. He said, oh, that could happen. He said there's like 30,000 different people on TV. They say only the president knows the code from the nuclear football and all this crap. He says there's like 30,000 men who could launch atomic bombs at any time.
Oh my God.
Who have the access and the authority and the codes and everything they need to launch nukes at any time. And he talked about all the myths and dis and weird incentives in the structure of our forces in the Pacific, for example, where they would train for if we got to take off and launch with our nukes to hit China. But the thing is, it's kind of dangerous to practice taking off with hydrogen bombs hanging under your belly over and over and over again. So what they would do is they would attach the hydrogen bombs, and then they would taxi the runway and they pretend to take off, and then they go back and park it. And Ellsberg pointed out how, you see, the problem here is that if you ever do the drill properly, where the planes actually take off, the pilots are going to assume that this is the real one.
Yeah.
And you're on the far side of the South Pacific Ocean from here, where communications are spotty at best on the best day. And you could have a squadron of fighters carrying nuclear weapons toward China, meet at the rendezvous point, not get instructions, and then it's easy to imagine that they would decide that, well, home base must have been nuked, and we should proceed to our target. And that you would have just, and he found, and Ellsberg is one of these guys with a 220 IQ kind of guy. So he's just gaming all of this out about what kind of misunderstandings could lead to nuclear war, and what one A-bomb or H-bomb being detonated here or there could mean for the rest of the policies for the rest of the day and the rest of the week. Does one A-bomb in one instance mean full-scale thermonuclear war? Everybody launch every last thing you got? Or does it not, or what? And the thing was completely screwy, like a Mel Brooks movie, right? It was the kind of thing where you just absolutely wouldn't believe it. And he said he was at the Rand Corporation when Dr. Strangelove came out, and he went and saw it with a colleague, and they came out into the bright light of the afternoon after seeing the movie and said, that wasn't a satire. That was a documentary. And that is how screwed up our policy is. And even to the point of, Dimitri, but what good is a doomsday device if you don't tell anybody that you have a doomsday device? It's no kind of deterrent. Remember that, where he's like complaining to the Soviet premier? Yeah. What do you mean you have this doomsday device? You didn't tell us you had one. So why is that going to change our behavior if we don't even know that you got the damn thing? Well, Ellsberg says that was real. The Russians had a doomsday device. If we had destroyed their entire military command structure and political command structure, the computers were set to launch by themselves to finish us off. And
this is terrifying.
As far as I know, it's still like that.
God damn it. Oh,
yeah. So anyway, good old Joseph Hickman, right? Where would we be without him?
Right? Yeah. No.
Are we seriously like this close to having like a pissing contest to of like the end of the world?
Yes.
Oh, with the Russians.
That's what it sounds like.
Yes. These are all psychopaths, and it's like a dick measuring contest. They want, you know what I mean? Like it's so ridiculous. It's the year 2021, and we can't use our words to solve our problems. We have to blow people up for profit. It's disgusting.
Even worse, 22.
Oh yeah.
But yet, I talked with Dan McAdams the other day, who was Ron Paul's foreign policy advisor up there in his congressional office for 15 years or something. And he's just so great. Ron's great anyway, but Dan also gets credit for how great Ron is. Because Ron, hell, he does nothing but read all day. So he knows all this stuff anyway. But Dan is just so well informed. So the conversations that those two men have together have, obviously had such an influence on Ron's foreign policy over this time. Anyway, so I was talking with Dan, and he goes, this is like a really important point to him that he really wanted to stress, that unfortunately, man, as crazy as it sounds like, even they're really not psychopaths. They're really just that full of themselves. They're really just that kind of stupid. And if you knew them or you're friends with them, and he lived in DC for a long time, he presumably drank at the bar with these guys more than a few times and talked with them. He didn't name names, but there was somebody in particular that he was thinking of as someone that it was like a personal acquaintance of his in DC, within the halls of power there somewhere. And this person's just certain that, of course, we got to stand up to Putin, that, you know, poor little Ukraine, and everything that's going on their side is aggression. Everything going on our side is defense. And they really believe it. And as Dan put it to me, he goes, you know, they just don't think like we do. They just don't. That's the way they look at it. USA, red, white, and blue, man. We're the good guys, and they're the
American
bad guys.
exceptionalism, baby.
And yeah, look, I mean, we wouldn't be using force or threatening to use force if we didn't have to, you know, but we have to. It's so important that we do the right thing here. We can't afford to look weak, or else something bad might happen, and all these kinds of things. So in other words, the same kind of crap they shovel on TV at us all day.
Yeah.
That's what they really believe. That's why those are their talking points, is those are the words they think in. So for you guys, or for Dan McAdams, or for myself, we look at Ukraine, and of course the first thing we ask is, why is this W. Bush's fault, right? Why is this Barack Obama's fault? What happened on our side to make it this way that they're reacting against? And so maybe that's our bias. I think it's a pretty reasonable one, considering America, not Russia, is the world empire right now.
Yes.
But they don't look at it that way. Not even to play devil's advocate. Not even to say, okay, thought experiment, red team. What if maybe we shouldn't have overthrown the government in Kiev in 2014 and that helped lead to this problem? I don't know, maybe a little. No, they don't. That's not how they talk about it. That's not how they think about it. If we weren't supposed to overthrow the government in 2014, then we wouldn't have.
Right.
Obviously, people decided it was an important thing to do, and so we did it. And it was a good thing to do, and that doesn't count as aggression. You know, I saw a tweet by Ann Applebaum from the Washington Post where she said, Vladimir Putin knows that everything we do in Europe is defensive. When we expand NATO, that's defensive. When we put arms in Poland and Ukraine, that's defensive. When we put our ships in the Black Sea, that's defensive. And he knows that that's true because he knows that he's the aggressor, and he's the one who's always threatening everyone, and he's the one who has to start a fight, and that's the reason why we have to deter him all the time. And it's like, you know what? She clearly is convinced of that. That is not just a line. That is the way that she thinks, and she has no problem whatsoever presuming what's in the mind of Vladimir Putin. He only ever pretends to be reacting when we all know he's the real bad guy. And if that's your mindset, it's just like George W. Bush saying, look, when God is on our side, we can't get it wrong. You know what I mean? It's just, it makes it completely not falsifiable. It makes it completely unreasonable.
Yeah.
And then, yes, could they get us in an H-bomb war with that kind of thinking, where they refuse to even like quietly admit to themselves when they're drinking later that like we did kind of help screw this up, you know, especially when Biden's government is made up of the Obama government. I mean, that's who these people are. Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken, and Biden himself was in on that coup in 2014. The president of the United States knows good and well that there was a coup in 2014. He was involved in it. And so I hope he ain't so senile that he can't remind himself that like, yeah, geez, I did help to put Putin in this position. I could see why he'd be mad. And this is an important thing, as long as I'm rambling. When America says we're putting anti-missile missiles in Poland and all these radar stations in for anti-ballistic missile stuff, which that's the treaty that George W. Bush broke, the anti-ballistic missile treaty. The thing about that is those anti-ballistic missiles are launched from the MK-41 missile launcher, which is the same thing that you use to launch Tomahawk cruise missiles tipped with H-bombs. So when America puts in these defensive missile launchers, from the point of view of Putin and his military, these are what the Americans would call dual use technology and could very well be a ruse, right? They could be trying, maybe we can't perfect our hypersonic missiles as well as the Russians and the Chinese yet. They got to jump on that while we were patrolling Pashtuns in their neighborhoods in the Helmand province. But hey, maybe we can just station Tomahawks 200 miles outside of Moscow. And so that's why Putin is building up his forces and saying he wants guarantees that we're not going to put these missiles into Ukraine.
Yeah.
And by the way, I don't know of any public indication that America was going to put those defensive so-called anti-missile missiles in Ukraine. And I don't want to give Putin the benefit of the doubt, but at least, one possible explanation is that he knew secretly, through intelligence that was a plan, or that it was something the Americans were at least considering. And he put a hard stop to that. I mean, they've been pouring in, anti-tank missiles and small arms and trucks and stuff like this. But if they're going to put in these potentially cruise missile launch tubes into the country, that was where he drew the line and said, I absolutely am not going to stand for it. And, threatened to invade and take half the country, if only by building up his forces. I don't think he wants to invade eastern Ukraine, but he was clearly making the threat that he will if it comes down to it there.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I mean, I'm not. People joke that I'm Comrade Missy's Putin's buddy. I'm not like a Putin fan, but I think he's been fairly reasonable given the amount of. We have troops all along his border, and we've been moving. I mean, we've broken all kinds of deals that we've had with him, and he's maintained some semblance of being reasonable and trying to maintain a cool head and in the face of aggression. Right. Yeah.
I do think that's right.
Yeah, I'm happy for that because he would have every right to be unreasonable or to be aggressive or whatever. But I still think that he's done a very good job of keeping a cool head under pressure and under all of this just blatant aggression. I mean, it's just right on his front door, and we refuse to back down, and we make no apologies for it, and it's kind of ridiculous. But
right, and I wrote in the book that if you look at the two worst things that Putin's done, it's his support for the uprising in the Donbass region there, which, whatever you think of it, it's the most violent action that he's taken, along with his intervention to save the Assad government in Syria. But in both of those cases, these were reactions against absolutely horrible American policies that preceded them that we never should have done.
Right.
I mean, the war in the east of Ukraine broke out because America hired a bunch of Nazis to do a street putsch, a violent revolution, and overthrow a democratically elected government in Kiev. And then they threatened to kick the Russians out of the Sevastopol naval base, their one all year round warm water port, and that they've owned since the 1780s, when 1783 was when we're making peace with the British, and under the Articles of Confederation. Was when they first, kicked all the Turks out and seized the Crimean Peninsula there. So, this is, if New York State belongs to the United States of America, then the Crimean Peninsula belongs to Russia. And they just absolutely precipitated that fight. And then they seized the Crimean Peninsula. And then the people of the East, it was their president that had been overthrown, the one that they had voted for. And they said, well, if you guys can do a street putsch and occupy government buildings and refuse to accept the authority of the democratically elected president, well, then we can surely refuse to recognize your coup d'etat junta. And so they seized a bunch of government buildings and declared independence, or tried to. And then the government of Kiev launched a brutal war on terrorism, invaded the eastern part of their own country mercilessly. And at that point, then the Russians spent special operations forces across to help them keep Kiev out, essentially to help them defend themselves. But in early 2015, they held a referendum in Donbass, in Donetsk and Luhansk, and said, we want to join the Russian Federation. And Putin told them no. He could have just taken a magic marker and expanded Russia's borders right there and said, this is now part of the Russian Federation. Anybody else wants to try me, try me. And that would have been the end of that. And he didn't do that. He told them, no, I don't want you. And for various reasons, the population of the East are very old and expensive pensioners. Their industry is quite decrepit and, probably, requires enough investment to renew it to not be worth it. And also right now he has kind of a 50-50 population with the pro-Russian leaning split there. And if he went ahead and seized the east of the country, now he has a Ukraine that's completely dominated by Ukrainian nationals and nationalists, ethnic Ukrainian nationalists, and probably with a much more harder slant toward the West and against his interests. So it would probably do him well to leave well enough alone if he could.
Yeah.
But he's just saying, I want to guarantee that you're not going to bring him into NATO. And to hear the Americans say, well, nobody gets to shut the door on who we bring into NATO. Well, that's just the way you're phrasing it, man. You shut the door on bringing them into NATO. It makes no sense. They're talking about bringing in Finland and Sweden into NATO. You know what? Finland was the ideal of the neutral country during the Cold War, them and Austria. People talk about the Austria plan for Ukraine, meaning let them be neither East nor West. Why make them choose and get stuck in this fight? And it's just crazy to think right now we need to bring Finland into NATO and arm them up. That's the kind of thing that'll get them attacked by Russia. That's not protecting them from Russia.
Right.
And you think the American people want to die for Norway? Like if Russia really did attack Norway, are the Americans really going to come to Norway's aid? Just because that's the big promise? See, these guys, when they talk about NATO expansion, their idea is that if we're so big and beefed up and armed up all the time, then no one will ever try it and call their bluff. But what if somebody does?
Right.
Are the Americans people really going to die for Latvia? to keep Lithuania and Estonia out of the Russian sphere of influence if they decide that they are going to put their efforts there to dominate those countries? Our Monroe Doctrine says you Europeans stay the hell out of American affairs, and we promise to stay out of European affairs in return. Well, I know your eyebrows go because you never even heard of that. They never teach that part of it, do they?
No.
Let's go back to that. You guys, this is just none of our business. Pat Buchanan said, Ukraine is east of what we ever called Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe extends as far as Hungary and Romania and no further. This is just crazy to think. We used to say, we'll go to nuclear war, Russia, to keep you out of West Germany and France and Spain and the Netherlands and Belgium, right? Now we're willing to go to nuclear war to keep them inside Russia. We moved our line 1,200 miles to the east to say you'll never be the dominant force even in Ukraine again. They're just pushing their luck. It's just insane to think. Remember, we were just talking about a minute ago. We could have had a hot war with Russia over Georgia, which Americans call former Soviet Georgia, so they don't confuse it with Georgia, the state in the union between South Carolina and Florida. And if you ask an American, where is former Soviet Georgia? They'd say, I don't know. They have no idea. And if you said, okay, it's between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, can you find it on the map now? They would say, no, where's the Caspian Sea?
No.
And we're talking about bringing this country into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization?
Yeah. God, Americans are so ill-educated.
About bringing Australia into NATO.
Right?
But that's the South Pacific. How can that be in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? The whole thing is completely bananas. And by the way, as Doug Bandow is always pointing out, the Germans are not militarizing right now.
Right.
The Germans have like one tank division and whatever. And you could say, oh yeah, well, they're just relying on us, but relying on us for what? And really, if you were the German military establishment and you were really worried about what Vladimir Putin and the Russians are up to, you're not going to rely on the Americans to have your back. You never know what the hell those feckless bastards will do. They'd turn around and take Russia's side against you again, maybe. You don't know. And so if they were really concerned, they would be building tanks. And as Doug Bandow loves to point out, they're not. The Germans are not militarizing. And the reason they're not militarizing is because the Russians aren't coming and they know it. They're just not. The whole thing is made up. In fact, you guys probably remember a year ago, the New York Times ran this hilarious story about how NATO had a big meeting because they had to find out why they existed. And they needed to come up with a new mission in life. And this was like a week after Joe Biden said that our commitment to NATO is sacred. And then the New York Times goes, well, we're having a big meeting to find out why we even have NATO at all. And then they said at the end of the article, they decided at their big meeting, the new reason for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's existence is China. They have to deter China from what? Invading Western Europe? And again, what does that tell you? First of all, that's completely preposterous, right?
Yes.
Like, what is this? You're just stealing money from me. I see you, right? But then the other thing is, what else are they saying there? What's the dog that didn't bark there? Russia's not the enemy. They're not arming up for Russia, because if you try to say to the Germans and the French and the whoever in Europe that Russia is the military threat and we have to build up to deter from them, they don't want to say that. Because they, one, know it's not true, and probably they're afraid that that's going to provoke the Russians into taking them more seriously than they are right now. So why are we going to do that when the Russians just are not headed this way? There's just no reason to believe that they are. And so instead, they go, well, I heard China might invade Taiwan in the Wall Street Journal said that. I don't know, you know?
Yeah, that was the latest that I saw too. Yeah.
Yes.
We'll bring Vietnam and Australia and South Korea into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, I guess.
Amazing. Oh, it's incredible. Okay,
Sacred.
I don't want to. Yeah,
Sacred
it is sacred.
commitment
Very
there.
sacred. Everything. Yes, very. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but before we let you go, I do just want to ask. We're 20 years Guantanamo Bay. We have all kinds of obvious evidence that this is a torture facility. There are 39 men still left there, 22 who are there without charge. And we have the work of Andy Worthington. We have the work of WikiLeaks. We have all of this stuff out there. Is it going to close, Scott Horton? Are we going to close Guantanamo Bay? You don't think so?
No, I don't think so. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something I neglected to say and address earlier, is that the categories of men there are people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi bin al-Shibh that the government says that they are going to prosecute. And they have been in the very, very slow process of the different forms of military tribunals that they've created there to try to bring these men to some form of trial there, which is, of course, difficult because they tortured the hell out of them. And so most of what they got out of them is inadmissible and this kind of thing. But even under their ad hoc rules there. But there is an entirely separate category of people there. As I mentioned, they get there. The Republicans ruled the habeas corpus thing by passing new legislation there that the Boumediene ruling had created. But so this is under the Obama Justice Department. I don't think the Trump people touched this at all. I think they just left it. That the Obama government said there are the people we're letting go. There are the people that we are going to give a trial to someday. And then there are the people that we are going to hold without charges for the rest of their lives. And we're never going to charge them or attempt to convict them because we don't have enough evidence to do it. Or any evidence that we do have against them, we got by torturing some guy, so we couldn't use it against them. But trust us, we know we want to hold these guys forever because of how bad they are. And so we're just going to. And that is official as of right now, that they are just holding these people who have no hope of ever even getting a hearing to decide whether the government has any real reason to hold them whatsoever or not. And it's because the government admits they couldn't convict them if they tried. So they're just going to have to hold them this way. And this is the United States of America that's doing this. And this is, again, in the year 2022, we're talking about this 20 years after they created this thing. And there are people still in there who are, if our government has a way, will never get a trial. They're not even planned to ever. There's not even a public relations script that claims that they're going to get a trial. The official story is that they're not. And that's, essentially where they're leaving it. And then, if it's going to close now, it would take Joe Biden just saying that, he's ornery and he's cranky and, he didn't have enough fruit in his oatmeal this morning. And God damn it, he's going to close that thing and nobody can stop him.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a political reason to do that.
No.
He doesn't have a good reason to do that other than being a decent person.
Nobody talks about it. So why would he care?
Yeah.
There's no pressure.
Not an issue now.
There's no pressure on him.
Absolutely not an issue like it was in the Bush years where it was, constantly, because it was a symbol of the terror war back then. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, people like to think that the terror war is over, although that's far from the case. But it feels like a previous era now. We're in the 2020s. We're on, our fourth president into this thing now. And it does feel like very long ago and far away to people, you know.
It does. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm afraid that
not looking good.
Yeah, I mean, look, like getting out of Afghanistan, Biden was up against the wall. If he wasn't going to get out, he was going to have to send 70,000 more guys and restart that thing. He was going to have a major crisis on his hands. The Taliban were ascendant all over that country. And so he had to leave, essentially. Like,
and now we're just sanctioning them to death. It's fine.
Yeah, that's right. But I mean, if he had decided to leave combat forces there, they would have been getting shot at.
Yes.
They would have been in real trouble, you know? And so in this case, he's not up against any particular wall at all.
No.
You know, I think they can keep kicking this can down the road, unfortunately.
I agree. Sadly, I agree.
Tragedy. And it's I don't want to use like embarrassment. It's a disgrace, right?
It is.
Yeah.
We're all raised to believe, and there is something to, it's not just PR. Like there is something to the doctrine of that this country, the unifying principle of this country is liberty and justice.
Yes.
That's what we care about, that everybody has the right to be free and everybody has the right to be treated fairly. You get accused of doing something wrong, we make sure that your court process is fair and adversarial in a way that you get to tell your side of the story. And that, all these things, these are our highest ideals. This is not a white Christian nation, and it ain't a Chinese Buddhist nation, and it ain't whatever it is, whatever thing. The one thing we all agree on is liberty. The one thing we all agree on is that, and the whole premise supposedly of having regular elections and democracy and all this at all is that we try to choose the best of our communities to go and represent us, to make the laws and execute the laws and do the best job they can, not to be a bunch of war criminals, not to act like a bunch of kings of the old world, exploiting weakness and getting away with bloody murder. That's not what this is supposed to be about. And everybody knows that this is wrong. How can you have the Statue of Liberty and the red, white, and blue and Guantanamo Bay?
Yes.
It's an abomination.
It is. Yeah. It is a stain on our history. 100. Well, I mean, our present, really, but it is a stain on our country. It is everything that we claim to stand against, really. I mean, it's disgusting. And the fact that it's been going on for 20 years is really depressing. And I think you're right. I don't think it's going to close because there isn't a political battle. There isn't any pressure being put on the administration. There's not going to be. People don't talk about it. People don't care. Even today, it's the 20th anniversary. And there was some, tweets about it on Twitter and stuff like that, but it didn't trend. Yeah. There wasn't like a big uproar there. And that's really unfortunate because this is something that, everybody should care about, that this is happening, that these people are being held without charge. They're just being held for years and years and years and years, 20 years. Some of these people have been there.
And credit to Assange and WikiLeaks too.
Yes.
And to Manning for leaking the Guantanamo files.
Yeah.
Yes.
The State Department cables and the Iraq and Afghan war diaries get most of the attention, but they also leaked the Guantanamo files that had all kinds of details of these guys' cases that were very important for helping the lawyers to get a bunch of people out and for newspaper writers to piece together parts of people's stories that had been excluded before and these kinds of things. Very important work. And just think of where we would be right now with all the information about the pandemic and the vaccines and the Wuhan lab and the whatever, all that would have come out through WikiLeaks.
Yes.
And just think about, Russiagate, all the truth about Russiagate and the framing of Carter Page and all of these things that all could have been released in real time or for that matter, the death of Jeffrey Epstein and the trial of his mistress. That just took place and all the information behind that. I don't know if you guys saw, it was just reported in a few places, but I double checked. I did see mainstream sources that were covering the trial in the courtroom that stated that an FBI agent testified that they seized 20,000 images from Jeffrey Epstein's mansion. And so where's our 5,000 indictments? And we would have them. We would know the truth. That stuff would be plastered all over WikiLeaks.org right now if Julian Assange was a free man. And that's why he's locked up.
Yes.
Not because he's 100%. A criminal, but because they're criminals.
Because he's a threat.
The hero telling the truth about who they are and what they do.
Yeah. And I say that all the time. Imagine what we would know. Imagine what we would know if Julian Assange was free.
Yep. And seriously, like, People say he's not a journalist, but the First Amendment doesn't say for journalists. Any person reporting a fact to any other person is in the act of reporting. That's protected. For the same
I think
reason
generally people who say that are journalists who are incredibly jealous of the work that he's done. He's broken more major stories than all other journalists combined, and he's never gotten it wrong, ever.
Right. That's right. He's never been caught publishing a fake document or a misleading document of any kind.
Which is an amazing history. I mean, WikiLeaks has been around for 15 years or so, and the fact that they've never had to retract a single document, a single word from a single document that they've ever published is incredible. That's amazing.
The thing is, there's obvious partisan reasons for both sides to hate Assange, because he embarrassed Bush with the Iraq and Afghan war logs and the Republican War Party then, although I think they should be over that by now. But then the Democrats rallied around him and Manning then.
Yes.
And said this was the right thing to do. But then they turned on, they turned on him over the DNC leaks, which were falsely blamed on Russia.
Yeah.
And then the election of Trump was blamed on Assange. And you can see this all the time on liberal Twitter, meaning center-left Twitter, that reminder everybody, Assange is the guy that saddled us with Donald Trump. And so they don't care that he's actually being prosecuted, not for treason with Russia and saddling us with Donald Trump at all. He's being prosecuted for receiving the Manning leak.
Yes. Has nothing to do with 2016. Nothing.
And the indictment against him is just an absolute fraud.
Yes.
And it could be the principle that Assange, a publisher, could be prosecuted for espionage for publishing documents leaked and furnished to him. If that precedent could be used to stop any American journalist from publishing any classified information at all.
Yes.
And now,
like you said, anyone.
Yes.
Not just any journalist.
Anybody
anyone.
who publishes
that's right. Any
anything.
person. That's
they
right.
They get to define what is a journalist now. They get to make that definition.
True that this is all, like everything in the world, this is Woodrow Wilson's fault. And the Espionage Act of 1917 is written exceptionally broadly.
Yes.
So it is essentially not much different than the English Official Secrets Act. And it does forbid anyone from disseminating classified information. Now, in the American tradition, they just haven't prosecuted that.
Right.
They've prosecuted leakers for espionage, starting with Ellsberg. And which, by the way, is on its face insane, right? Espionage is when you're stealing secrets for the benefit of a foreign power, not when you're leaking secrets to the newspaper, because this is supposed to be a limited constitutional republic where the people are sovereign and they have the right to know the truth.
Well, that's what I find so fascinating, is that espionage is supposed to be that you're leaking information to a foreign enemy. And what this really says to me now is that because it's being leaked to us, we're the enemy.
Yep.
We are now
100%.
considered the enemy.
And then this guy's not even the leaker. This guy, Assange, is the leak-e. Simple as that. Anybody who says different is a liar.
All he did was publish 100% verifiable information. That's it.
Yep.
That's what he did.
And even though there are some national security reporters who I would like to see thrown into dungeon just because I hate them. I don't want to see reporters going to prison for publishing secrets. And it'll only be the best ones, not the ones that I want to see in the hole.
Right.
Like Charlie Savage, the scumbag CIA stenographer liar.
Luke Harding. Can we get Luke Harding in there too?
Assange and says Assange isn't a real journalist.
Yeah.
The CIA stenographer.
Yeah.
Dishonest hack. He won't get prosecuted. It'll be the Assanges of the world and the Taibis of the world, the people who break real stories and publish classified documents. For that matter, Carol Rosenberg and some of these others who've covered Guantanamo Bay.
Yep.
And those are the kind of people who then will be at risk
for
receiving and publishing classified information, which has never been the American tradition. Even after Woodrow Wilson's horrible law, they never used it that way until now.
Well, and it's even more troubling because Julian Assange isn't even American. We're charging him under American laws, but affording him none of the protections of such. And it's this massive overreach. I mean, the United States is seeking global jurisdiction over information and journalism. That's what it boils down to.
And if that's universal, then that just means that the Russians or the Chinese, or pick your favorite boogeyman country out there, could do the very same
Can also
thing.
do the same. Yes.
And
That's an unbelievably dangerous
American
precedent.
indicted for breaking their laws in their country without ever even leaving their home in our country.
Yes, 100%.
You know?
So true.
Totally nuts.
So very true. Okay. Anyways, I don't want to keep you too much longer. We've kept you for
No
so long.
problem.
Thank you for being so generous with your time. Seriously,
Happy
I love
New Year,
talking
guys.
to you.
Great to talk to you again.
Happy. Yeah, you too. Thanks
This
for
was
coming
amazing.
on.
I
Yeah,
really
we'd love to have
appreciate
you
it.
back.
Yeah.
Our audience loved it too. The chat's been lighting up with praise of you. So thank you so much.
Okay, great.
You guys can find Scott Horton on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. I highly recommend his book. If you haven't gotten it already, you should definitely do that.
And the podcast.
And the podcast, yes, all of those things.
And the series that you did on YouTube. It was it was like a 10-part series ish, something like that. Yep. Yeah. That's also fantastic for like just getting
all of Scott's work. All of Scott's work.
All my
go
speeches,
seek it out.
And I did Kennedy Nation on Fox Business Channel tonight.
Yes.
So that'll be out tomorrow.
I haven't checked that out, but was it on tonight? It was on.
Yeah, it was on live.
I'll check it out. I'll check out the clips of it. So yeah, everybody, please go check out Scott's work and support him however you're able. We need to support independent media, independent truth tellers. It's more important now than ever. So thanks
on
again
Audible
to Scott.
now.
Yeah, hey, look at that! It's on my bookshelf back there somewhere.
Right. Brand new. The audio book is finally out. So sorry that took so long.
Did you read it yourself? I'm always curious.
So the book came out almost 1 year ago on the 16th. Last year was the 30th anniversary of Iraq War I.
Nice.
But now the audiobook is out in case you're dyslexic, but you still want to know.
Nice. Did you read it though? I'm always curious if authors. You did?
Yeah.
I love that. I love that because I think an author reads it much better than somebody hired to do it for them.
Well, I know from Fool's Errand that there were guys, at all levels, all different levels of the Army and in boot camp, and Army officers and people all over the world were marching around out there in their combat boots with their M4s, listening to Fool's Errand on their earbuds.
Nice.
So
love that.
I heard about that from them later on. So I hope that that's the case here, that, the thing will really get out. In fact, we're going to do this. We found this cool little gimmick where you can make little USB thumb drives that look just like books.
Oh,
so we're going to have Fool's Errand on one side and Enough Already on the other side.
Wow.
I want one of those.
Spread them to the masses, man.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you again for joining us. You're welcome back anytime you want to come on. And thanks to everybody in the chat. I am just going to really quickly remind everybody about the trip we're taking to DC in April for the 3-year anniversary of Julian Assange's arrest. I'm going to throw the GoFundMe in the chat. If you guys can help us, we're really close to 1K. I would love to hit that goal. So if you can donate, please donate. If you cannot, sharing helps tremendously. You guys have no idea. We need to make more noise for Julian Assange in DC. We're going to go straight to the belly of the beast, to the front doors of the DOJ, and yell at them. And make some noise. So if you can help us get there, we would really appreciate it. Thanks again to Scott for being our guest. Thanks to Alex Rubenstein for being on earlier. I love him. He does great work as well. Support him in any way possible. And we will see you guys on Friday with Addie Ads, who was on the ground covering the Ghislaine Maxwell trial in New York. So, and no, Steve, my birthday is in 32 minutes. My birthday's tomorrow.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, we will see you guys on Friday. Thanks so much for joining us. And that's it. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.